If you're taking roll call, we can't hear the committee.
I can't either.
Yep, still can't hear anything. The camera view changes, but nothing comes over Zoom. Yep, still nothing. Can't hear anything.
Can you hear now?
No, I can't. I think they just wanted to say that they're taking a break.
They're calling IT. The problems of Zoom. So how you doing, Mike?
I am doing okay. Doing
Good.
okay.
That was a long meeting yesterday.
It sure was.
She can hear us.
Representative Yin, can you hear us?
I can now.
So everybody, presuming that fixed the technical problem, the chairman is outside for the moment. We'll get him back in here and we'll get started. You can hear all this?
Yes.
Yep, we can hear you all.
Looks like we got the fix. All you had to do was think about it. Here comes the chairman now.
push the reset button. We'll just start over again. Welcome, day 2 of our Joint Revenue Committee meeting. Please take the roll.
Senator Baldwin,
Here again.
Senator James, Senator Pappas,
Excused.
Senator Schuler, Representative Baker, Representative Gray,
Here.
Representative Hallinan,
Here,
Representative Henderson, Representative Jennings,
Here.
Representative Roscoe,
Here.
Representative Sweeney,
Here.
Representative Yin,
Here,
Co-Chairman Case, Chairman Harshman.
Okay, very good. Thank you. We are on item number 12, discussion of property tax and appeals. We have 2 bills. We're going to start with the working group bill, the working draft 276 version 6. And so I think Josh is ready to take us through the bill. Appreciate everybody's work on this. Our elected assessors, elected representatives, and all of our LSO staff as we continue this work. Josh, take us through the bill, please.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Josh Anderson, LSO. This bill, as you noted, was discussed at the September meeting, and a working group was created, met several times on this issue. And the current version is what you see before you, 276 version 0.6. The first 3 changes beginning on page 2 and through page 3, those are all changes that change statements of consideration that are provided or created when a transfer of property occurs from confidential records to public records. Continuing on to page 3 and over to page 4, this first section of changes are related to a review of property taxes with the county assessor. So top of page 4, you can see that again, it's just clarified to that the taxpayer is entitled to a review of the property tax assessment with the assessor and copies of statements of consideration. Then it provides that the county assessor shall, upon request, disclose information, and it revises what information that includes, just copies of all relevant information, which shall include but not be limited to statements of consideration and any database or spreadsheet analysis the assessor relied upon in determining the property value. There's a new section, a sentence there, Mr. Chairman, where the taxpayers or his agent may request information under this subsection at any time after the review period and until 30 days before any scheduled hearing under subsection B. Finally, Mr. Chairman, there's an addition to the last sentence or second to last sentence of that paragraph, which says that the county assessor shall provide a statement why certain property was not used, adds that this information shall be provided in a timely manner to enable the taxpayer or his agent to determine the effect of not using the property had on the valuation. The next subsection, starting on the middle of page 5, is the appeals. It extends the time that an appeal can be filed from 30 days to 45 days and clarifies that's after the postmark or electronic transmission. Over to page 6, it says that they are required to exchange information, evidence, and documents, which shall include but not be limited to sales information from relevant statements of consideration, the land, economic area, or strata available to the property, applicable to the property, and the land attributes applicable to the property. It then adds a new sentence saying that failure to disclose witnesses or provide or exchange information may result in the exclusion of the undisclosed testimony, evidence, or documents at the hearing at the discretion of the county board or hearing officer. Then provides that if the county assessor has unreasonably failed to provide the information, the county board may grant the appeal and remand the case back to the county assessor for an adjustment to the valuation. Middle of page 7 there, it adds makes clear that appraisals of the property can be introduced into evidence. And also deletes the reference to a presumption in favor of the valuation asserted by the county assessor. Bottom of that page, Mr. Chairman, it provides that the County Board of Equalization may, based on a preponderance of the evidence, affirm the valuation, remand the case back to the assessor with specific instructions, or find in favor of the taxpayer and remand the case back to the assessor for an adjustment to the valuation. Finally, Mr. Chairman, it just provides that the provisions related to statements of consideration apply to statements of consideration filed on or after the effective date of the act. That's the bill, Mr. Chairman. I'd take any questions.
Okay, all right, very good, thank you. Okay, members, we're going to open this up to public testimony. I'd like to start with elected officials. I want to recognize former Senator Jane Mockler is here. Welcome. It's nice to see you and appreciate your continued service. Okay, are there any members of the public would like to testify? I think Mr. Co-Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, we have several assessors here. They're elected, of course, so they'd be up. I do know that the Toronto County Assessor was hoping to give some background information about how we got to where this is about.
Absolutely. You want to start off, Assessor Keating? Did you drive down this morning? Yeah, well, appreciate. How was the roads? Good? Good deal. Well, appreciate you traveling down. Sure, anywhere. And those mic buttons are a little, you'll have to work it. But appreciate you making the trip down here.
Thank you for having me.
Oh,
No,
thank you.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Introduce yourself for the record and who you represent and
Well,
Thank
good morning. Thank you for your time, gentlemen, ladies. I'm Matt Keating, the Toronto County Assessor, and it has been an experience being the Toronto County Assessor over the last 3 years. When I took over the office in January of 2019, we had 47,000 plus accounts, and everything in that office had been neglected. The office as a whole needed a complete overhaul. Veterans exemptions hadn't been reconciled with the state website. We did that the first time in 2019. We gave the first 3 present worth to contractors in Toronto County in 2019 in Toronto County, which is kind of embarrassing to hear. We have, and we were put under a work order from the State Board of Equalization, and that was appropriate because not the work that we had done, but because the mess that we walked into, it was recognized. And so we started working then with the Department of Revenue per the direction of the State Board of Equalization. It was very appropriate. So for the last 3 years, we've been working with the Department of Revenue because in these 47,000 plus accounts, there were real properties that were in our system that were listed as vacant when they had improvements. We had personal property that needed cleaned up. Agriculture exemptions were given when people aren't even in the state. But moving forward with that, excuse me. And looking at this process, I also reached out to the Toronto County assessors. In fact, Ken Guile is here this morning, and he, in my opinion, is really the gold standard. And if this board is going to look at the process as a whole, I would personally ask that they look at the departments that actually understand the process. Those are the Toronto County assessors offices, the Department of Revenue, and the State Board of Equalization. So in the Toronto County specifically, in 1994, I myself, not knowing really what an assessor did, I appealed my taxes, the value on my house. I used a fee appraisal and I was granted a change outside the 30-day window. I did not realize that that was incorrect. 2006, Susan DeWitt was equalized because she was out of compliance statistically in Natrona County. The previous administration, we are under work order because we're out of compliance statistically over a number of years. And it's not just 1 year. Generally, it's 5 years or more. And so when we walked into this mess with a staff of 10, and there is an IAAO 400 calc that basically off the number of parcels and the workload, it gives you a staffing requirement. We were at 10 people, and that calculation said you should be at 21. I very much appreciate Paul Bertolio, the Natrona County Chair, reaching out and talking to this group and giving some explanation of our needs in Natrona County. We're currently at 17. We're still working towards that, but we're making progress. But the progress, and I can tell you about the progress that we're making. But instead of me telling you, you might think that, I mean, because you might think that maybe my opinion is prejudiced. So I would like to read to you if I can, and I will absolutely provide a copy to anybody that would want one, a letter from the State Board of Equalization. And I read this, excuse me, with some emotion, honestly. The Department of Revenue, the people that we had worked with over the last 3 years have been amazing. And it has been difficult in our office, but we do it with honesty and integrity. Doing it that way is it's been expensive. We have lost friends and family through this process. And I would go home and have a conversation with my wife, and I would tell her about my conversations with the Department of Revenue and the positive things and that they're saying about the efforts that we're making and the progress that we're making. She said, "Well, why don't they say something?" And I would tell her that, well, they're like an umpire. They're not here to take a side. They're here to call balls and strikes. And in my opinion, it's the same thing with the State Board of Equalization. But the State Board of Equalization on October 19th, 2021, wrote this letter. Honorable Matt Keating, Natrona County Assessor. Dear Matt, we first want to acknowledge your office's steadfast improvement and impressive work to overcome significant operational challenges over the last 2 years. As we have discussed several times, you undertook management of an office that had experienced consistent transition and little continuity over the last 6 years. As you've worked to turn the Natrona County Assessor's Office around, your constituency has predictably resisted your efforts to meet your demands that valuation be updated to meet all the State Board of Equalization guidelines. You have consistently satisfied our overarching directive that your valuation practices substantially improve and that the quality of the work trend towards strict compliance with the department's mass appraisal guidelines. Notwithstanding the rough patches encountered these past 2 years with heavy criticism from various sectors, County Board of Commissioners, legislators, taxpayers, you have preserved and are by all accounts trending in the right direction. Our review of Jordan Martin's statistical analysis confirms this, and we are now more confident that those numbers reflect what is truly happening on your watch. That said, the State Board of Equalization Order 2019-01 will stay in effect for the same reasons that we did not lift it last year. That order demonstrates the board's commitment to working with Natrona County to work past the non-compliance issues which have plagued it in the past. Plus, as you certainly will agree, there is still much to achieve. For our part, we will continue to trumpet to all concerned your Herculean efforts to bring your office into full compliance with the law and the sound mass appraisal practice. Please let us know if you have any questions or if there's anything we could do for you. So in closing and I'd just like to say, again, just reiterate how much I do appreciate your guys' time. As you guys look at this, please, the assessors group as a whole will talk to you about anything that you want to talk about. Absolutely. But the first thing that they pointed out was there's nothing wrong with the process that's in place. What we are seeing in this Natrona County experience is that some of the sticker shock, where we have thousands of accounts that hadn't been revalued in a number of years, but we're getting it in place. We put mailed our first statistically compliant value in 20. This last year, we've sent out over 4,000 letters to people in Natrona County, gathering information so we can continue to improve our stratification. We're producing a better and better product. Thank you for your time.
Okay. thank you.
Questions? I
Any
apologize.
questions, Assessor Keating? Any questions? Did you? Okay, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Keating. So do you think that, I think it was over 4,000 appeals. I mean, I understand you're saying that there weren't revaluations. Do you think is that normal in your opinion?
No, thank you, Mr. Chairman. No, it's not normal at all. It's not normal. It was a little over 3,000 appeals. The record in Natrona County was actually Mr. Sutherland, Assessor Sutherland. He had over 4,000 appeals. Well, I would really love an opportunity to sit down with him and find out why. A large number of the appeals were land developers who had a large parcel that they had divided up into a number of parcels for development. Each one of those was an appeal. But no, it's not normal. What's happened in Natrona County, this experience, this Natrona County experience is in very much my opinion, because the system that we have is a good one, had been neglected. So what we're doing is we have ripped off the Band-Aid and we're implementing the process that is appropriate to the best of our ability.
Follow up?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one of the things that we've heard, that I heard from you initially and from people that had talked to you was that, well, which we often have sometimes from certain county officials, it is, look, the legislature, I'm just interpreting the statute that the legislature passes. Okay, so, and I understand you're just giving some background here, but in the bill itself, we really have 5 key reforms. Okay, we have removing the presumption,
Sure.
which is an appeals issue. We have turning over the documentation, which I understand you contend occurred. I think there's going to be testimony later that many don't think that occurred.
Sure.
We're going to have the statements of consideration public, which I think if we fix the documentation issue, we could probably punt on that issue, because I think that may be a different topic. And then we have these sort of 2 ancillary things, just clarifying that fee appraisals can be used in an appeal process, which is current equalization rule, but for some reason doesn't seem to be occurring in counties in practice. And I've talked to the County Board of Equalization in Natrona. They appear to be unclear that fee appraisals can be used. And then this clarification that if something's remanded to you, you have to take action in accordance with the county board, which the statute currently doesn't say. I mean, those are 5 reforms, and I don't think there's anything there. You know, I understand you're defending the office and not getting too much in the nitty gritty on that. What do you think of those 5 reforms?
Well, forgive me, I should have taken notes. Sorry, Representative Harshman.
Why don't you let's start with a presumption.
Okay.
And I think where is that? That's on page 7, Bill.
Yeah.
Takes away the presumption asserted by the county assessor.
As far as the presumption goes in process in Natrona County, at least, I don't think it would make any difference at all. And I know that the assessors as a whole have been willing to concede presumption. And I would actually just remind this board of what is, and I don't want to speak for the state board at all, but they said their comments were they're still and I had the word a minute ago. I'm so sorry. Without the presumption, there is still burden. There's still burden that is required, and when we prepare these cases, we have a pride and a quality product that we present, and we have no hesitation about meeting our burden whatsoever.
How about the time, extending that 15 days from 30 to 45?
Well, as the assessors have testified, there isn't enough, we are by state statute, we mail by the fourth Monday in April or soon thereafter. We generally are about 3 days into the, after we try to have our 30-day window end at 5 o'clock on a Friday. But there isn't, I don't believe there's enough calendar days before we have to have our abstract to the state board for approval.
It's going to get ready. Okay.
Yes, sir.
How about using appraisals?
Well, we do use appraisals. That's part of the deal. I think that what the issue is, I think there's misunderstanding here in some sense. When somebody gets an appraisal, it's not to find out how many square feet they have for their house or what the characteristics are of the house. We use the appraisals to look at what we have in our evidence, in our accounts, to ensure that we're valuing the property as best we can. And certainly we have found some differences in square footage and other things. But the reason that it's my understanding, the reason I would testify today that somebody gets an appraisal is for that value. But this is mass appraisal. It's not fee appraisal. We can't use an appraisal and say that is the value that we will be attributing to this property specifically. I believe it's in conflict with Gray versus the state board.
Okay. And what were the other? I think I did 3. Was that 3? What were the 2 more? Representative Gray.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'm trying to, the public statements of consideration was one. I think that issue is,
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Thank
How
you.
about that one? You want to say that again, Representative Gray?
yeah, the issue of making public statements of consideration rather than it just being turned over in the dossier, which frankly, I think if we clarify that, maybe the public statements of consideration because of the privacy concerns, if we address it in the other reform, I think it addresses it. But yeah.
I believe the Assessors Association has said very clearly that we're absolutely behind making the statements of consideration public. How they do that is still a process, I guess, would be clarified.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, the last reform was the one that the state assessor needs to take action if something's remanded by the county board. You will have cases where something's been remanded by the county board and no action is taken by the assessor, which sort of defeats the purpose. And so we added some language that action does need to be taken to address those county board concerns. Thank you.
Okay. Any comments on
Yeah,
that?
no, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Excuse me. It would be, and again, I would just mention that the 3 groups of people, the assessors, Department of Revenue, and the State Board of Equalization understand the process. I have had cases remanded that I don't believe should have been remanded. It would be very helpful for my county commissioners, my county board of equalization, the legislatures, the taxpayers, anybody that's interested in learning more about it, to read the decisions by the State Board of Equalization. They're really very good. They take the appellant's questions and concerns and outline them, and explain it. And it's very helpful. But if something is remanded, I had one remanded about a week or so ago, because they had an appraisal. And I'm quoting, I think I'm quoting fairly accurately. They had an appraisal that was just a little over a year old, and they didn't like the neighborhood adjustment. And so with that, I have no, when I believe what I have done is appropriate, then yes, I absolutely will appeal it to the state. And hopefully at that point, well, it has been, what I believe it will happen is that we will get a very good explanation of the process. And if anybody has been treated or mistreated, it'll come out.
Okay. Any other questions of Assessor Keating? Representative Gray.
Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A couple more things I want to ask about, and I was trying to keep it to the bill, but do want to ask a couple things about the Natrona experience because that was also something you addressed in your testimony.
Okay, sure.
One thing I've heard from members of the County Board of Equalization on the land economic areas that outside of Casper city limits, there is only one land economic area. And we have seen huge issue, and I know you're proud of the city limits, but many of the issues are on vacant lots and on outside of city limits. And I think there's problems in city limits too. I don't want to be clear, but a lot of it's on the mountain. And I think that might be a big source of the problem. So one of my questions is there only one land economic area outside of Casper city limits? And two, the other thing I've heard from the county board is that they haven't even received the land economic areas. Okay. And so appellees are supposed to be receiving all that information. And that's one of the key reforms in the bill. That information is going to be turned over, but I've heard the county board hasn't even seen this data. So that's my two questions. Thank you.
Okay, go ahead, Assessor.
Let's see if I can do a good job. I think there's a couple of things in there. Is there more than one land economic area outside the city of Casper city limits? The answer is yes. And there was a neighborhood adjustment of 2.22 on Casper Mountain. Yeah, those 4,000 letters that I mentioned that we sent out to the Natrona County taxpayers, 1,200 of those went to the mountain to continue to gather information to improve our stratification. And absolutely, but we mailed a statistically compliant value. And we have had some issue with our County Board of Equalization bringing iPads, cell phones, et cetera, using maps and opining with information that they're gathering instead of looking at the evidence provided for them. So they're making just a decision based off of our evidence and the petitioners, which is really outside the bounds.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Okay, Representative Sweeney has a question.
Oh, of course.
Thank you, Assessor Keating. So I didn't want to make this about Natrona County, but since the assessors seem to want to make it about Natrona County,
Okay.
we'll head that direction. So in 2020, where you had 3,000 plus appeals, which the other assessors have testified, in the working group, very unusual. And I understand the catch-up game. So in the end, did the total valuation of Natrona County hugely differ in the end with the way you treated land versus improvements? And then reverse that, in my opinion, from what I could tell, reversing that so that it statistically matched what the State Board of Equalization demanded.
Okay,
No,
Assessor
absolutely.
Keating,
Yeah, thank
go
you.
ahead.
Yeah, so yeah, in 20, we used an abstraction method. So basically, our process in mass appraisal is a hybrid between sales and then a cost. The sales are used to develop the value for the land, and then the cost is the building. It's replacement cost new, less depreciation. In 20, we used that process and we removed replacement cost new, less depreciation from the sales price, which left a higher amount of the total value attributed to the land. This year, we've changed that process to an allocation, which is why you see the difference. Per the Wyoming Constitution, both those need to be listed on the notice of value. And it is confusing, but you need to look at the total value because it's the total value that you pay taxes on. So when the land took up a larger percentage of the fair market value, there was a neighborhood adjustment down generally on the improvement. It's down, say, that replacement cost new, less depreciation times 0.93 or a minusing 7% to bring it into compliance. In this year, we used an allocation method. Our land values were more appropriate, but what you're seeing in that process is a neighborhood adjustment up. But it's all sales driven. It's all based off of what people are paying for properties in Natrona County. Department of Revenue rules, Chapter 6, have basically 9 criteria that we use to try and invalidate a sale. But if it's not a valid sale, we better have a good reason why we're not using it in the valuation. But did that answer your question, Representative Sweeney?
Go ahead, Representative.
No.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
So what was the total valuation before you started of Natrona County? And when you ended with your statistical analysis, was it 2 billion for the county when you started? When you ended, was it 2 billion? What was the total valuation?
I don't have that number, Mr. Sweeney, but I can tell you that it was less. Honestly, in this process, especially for those, again, the large percentage of those appeals were those developers. What we had done, well, this isn't a whole explanation, but what we had done is we took Marshall and Swift development costs and we deducted those from our land values to give a cost. But there's an obvious, and that was the only way that we at the time understood that we had to move forward. But so I called a meeting and we had a meeting with the Department of Revenue and these developers, recognizing the fact that not every development has the same costs. And so again, thank you to the Department of Revenue helping educate us and help us grow to develop a better product. We ended up putting another tool in our belt that we were able to lower those costs. So they're and still be statistically compliant and operating inside the parameters of the law.
Any follow?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So again, you don't know the number as far as valuation. My understanding was there was all of those appeals, the amount of money that people had to spend on private consultants, attorneys, and basically, in my opinion, the deck is stacked absolutely against the consumer and the taxpayer, me being one, without outside help. So my understanding from one of the county board, Natrona County Board of Equalization, at the end of the day, there was a net difference of $200,000 in taxes after hundreds of thousands of dollars being spent in man hours with attorneys and the rest of it, trying to fight their case. Do you believe that's accurate for 2020?
It might be, yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
and I just clarification, is that, I mean, just property values, or is that mineral production, or is that the total or?
My understanding, total. That at the end of the day, that was the difference with all of that. So if I could follow up.
Sure.
So 2021, let's forward to 2021.
Mhm.
So my understanding is you ended up with about 350 appeals. Is that accurate?
I believe it was 374.
So in that process, can you tell me what was the county valuation, total for 2021?
Representative Sweeney, I apologize. If I'd have known that you were, wanting those specific numbers, I would have brought them today. I don't have those for you.
So,
Let's
Assessor,
make sure we work through the chair here. It's not
Okay.
a conversation.
Sorry.
Well,
Representative.
I mean, and I get it.
I
It's,
appreciate it.
but let's, I know it's quicker that way, but we want to make sure we keep the conversation between you two gentlemen,
Apologize.
between all of us. Okay, continue, please. Go ahead, Mr. Sweeney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So in the appeal process, wouldn't it seem relevant to know the valuation of your county? Overall, and then you're supposed to be hitting some sort of statistical basis for what the county commissioners can set their budget on. You've got to end up with a valuation of some sort for them to have a value, I would think. Or is that done by the State Board of Equalization?
Sorry, Representative Harshman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a couple of things in there, I guess. The Trona County commissioners approve the mills, I think on the first Monday in August every year. They're always the same. That's a question. Okay, something needs, anyway. But I don't know. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Harshman, could you ask the second half of that?
Now, we'll just move on. So this isn't
Any other
actually,
questions?
no,
Okay.
thank you.
Turn my mic on. Members, any other questions? Go ahead,
One
Representative
more
Gray.
comment. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and certainly I'll have a chance to respond. Representative Sweeney has talked about this a lot, and I really appreciate him bringing up that statistic. The fact that basically the overall change in Natrona County overall as a county has been $200,000, basically. So you have properties on the mountain that have been going up 500%, 1,000%. But overall, it's basically net zero. So that means some are going down. And so you've talked with me about this, that some are going down. And so it's just confusing. I don't understand what's going on in Natrona County. And I'm not sure. Is that what's happening? Is there a massive transfer where some are going up 500 to 1,000% and then others are going a little down? Is that the Natrona experience? And why is that happening? Were some adjusted too much? Because you said in your testimony that some were adjusted way too low and were just way too low. And that's why the state board. So were there some that were too high? I'm just trying to understand overall what happened in the Natrona experience. Thank you.
Go ahead, Assessor.
Well, yeah, Mr. Chairman. Well, Representative Gray, look, yeah, it's true. You don't understand the process, and I would invite anybody, in fact, almost beg anybody, especially, I've sent letters out to the representatives from Natrona County to please come in and sit in my office. And you were in my office a couple of weeks ago and we only had a few minutes. I appreciate your time, but it requires more time than just that. Yes, some properties did go down, but in this market, the great majority of them went up. People don't tend to file a claim or petition their property taxes when they're undervalued. Again, we have thousands of accounts that were static from back to 2013 or before. And yeah, but is this in Natrona County experience? No. If you look at the people that testified before this group on September 29th, they were all from Natrona County except for Mrs. Barlow, all of them. But it goes to speak to, I guess, the lack of what was being done and us implementing the process that is a good one that works. But it's, a politician doesn't do this to get reelected. He does it because there's integrity in it. He does it because he's honest. He does it because it's the right thing to do, at no matter the cost.
Question, just a quick question I have, Assessor. So when we're talking about the Natrona County experience, and these total values,
I mean, I'm gonna say it again. Does that, you're including the Salt Creek oil field in that? Is that what you're, I mean, when you say this number of 2 billion, I mean, and what is the assessed, I mean, the amount of assessed value of that oil patch as a percent to the whole county? I mean, when I was a kid, it was like 90%, you know, and it's probably somewhere, what is it, 50% of the value of the county or?
Well, Mr. Chairman, look, I can get those numbers
Sure,
for
I
you guys.
get
So I apologize for not having them today. If I'd have known that this was, some information you wanted, I absolutely would have provided
I
it.
guess my point is the price of oil is going to make a big difference on the valuation of Natrona County, just like coal in Campbell County. I mean, it
Yes, sir.
does, and it'd be interesting to kind of, I think there, you got to flesh, there's always more to the story on a lot of this stuff, but I'd like to learn. I don't know, Frank, that's what I'm asking,
I
but
would-
anyway, we'll follow
I
up.
would very, very much appreciate an opportunity to come to my office for an hour. I would
Yeah, you bet.
very much value that.
Well, I appreciate, how many years did you serve as a commissioner?
14.
Well, I appreciate your
Well, thank-
lifetime of public service here. Casper, born and raised there.
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Yeah,
appreciate your
thank
service
you.
and your family. How many kids?
I have 8.
It's awesome.
Yeah.
So,
Yes, sir.
all right. Well, appreciate your service. Thanks
you
for
for your time.
driving down today.
Of course.
Okay,
Absolutely.
thank you. Okay, any other public testimony? Any assessors? Any elected folks?
Morning,
Well,
Mr.
good
Chairman.
morning.
I learned yesterday I might need some water, so I brought it with. Sometimes the seat gets warmer than others.
Although we all know you, please introduce yourself for the
You bet.
record.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Dixie Huxtable, Converse County Assessor and the Legislative Chair for the Wyoming County Assessors Association. And this is a topic dear to all of our hearts. The Wyoming County Assessors Association want all of you to know, and all of our taxpayers to know, that as locally elected officials, we take this very seriously. We strive to ensure that every taxpayer's value has been a part of a fair and equitable valuation process that is truly transparent. We live with these local people. We see them in the stores. We participate in community services with them. So we understand their frustrations and we strive to get it right. We strive to help the local taxpayer understand the system, and it is complicated, as you all know. We do not want to make them have a formal appeal. The cost, the frustration, the time on both sides, if we can alleviate that, we will. And that is why we believe the initial review that's a part of this bill is so vitally important. We want to make sure our data is correct. And we use that review period to make sure that we will defend a correct value. We will not defend something that's incorrect. We want to meet the taxpayer so we can help them understand the complicated system that they're going through. Many of them don't understand that. So we really rely on that initial review that's in the statutes to allow us the opportunity to help that taxpayer remedy get started so that the taxpayer and the assessor have a good dialogue. We felt like this legislation had a tone that we were trying to hide something, either in our data or our processes, and that is just not true. The normal taxpayer walks into our office, sits down, sometimes just to vent, but mostly just want to understand how it works, and we go through the process with them. The fact that the outreach that you've heard has been limited to specific county. We have not heard from senators or representatives from other counties of outrages. We believe the system works. There was, as it's been referred to, the Natrona situation. And we think it's wrong. We think that there was some things that could be done better, but the statutes allow for it to work. The current statutes allow for the exchange of evidence. They allow for the initial review. It appears that this bill really helps a tax agent or consultant get more information than the normal taxpayer because they don't even know what they're asking for most of the time. They want to know how we calculated their value. And when we can sit down with them and talk to them about that at least starts the process, if not ends it, usually. If the intent of the bill is to codify into law what we're already doing, by all means, we're here to help. We will help in any way we can to do that. You've already heard a lot about the Natrona County situation, so I'm not going to go into that. I think many of you had probably received some letters from various county assessors across the state explaining their processes. And I hope if you had a chance to look at those, you see that every county is doing basically the same thing, maybe in a little different format or a little different procedure, but they're following that taxpayer remedy that's in the law now. And they're working with their taxpayers, and the appeal process is there, and the ability to share all of the relevant information. There are current dockets, and I have a list of them out on the State Board of Equalization website, where even these recent cases have been heard, and the language in this bill that you want to add is already available in those cases. They've entered fee appraisals into the record. Now, whether or not they continued with the testimony with them, I can't speak to that. That would be the State Board of Equalization's records. But taxpayers are entering those fee appraisals into evidence. The situation about the taxpayers not getting the information, the evidence shows different in the records on the State Board of Equalization. They did get the information. Whether it was timely or not is maybe in the eye of the beholder, and we are sure willing to work with that and do whatever we need to help clarify that. But they did get the information. It was in the record. The exhibits were listed. Sometimes they were listed, but they were never referred to. And if you read some of those state board decisions, you will see where maybe some of the problem lied with some of the witnesses or how the documents were presented. There are dockets out there that show you that when the assessor is wrong, they fix it. They remand it back for action and fix it. Many times it's the decision from the County Board of Equalization that either is not written clearly or properly that lends to confusion. We're remanding it back for what? Those things are already in the statutes, and I'm sure the State Board will be happy to talk about some of those situations. Maybe education, more training between the State Board of Equalization, county boards of equalizations, county assessors, county attorneys would better benefit it than changing the language in the law that already covers everything that needs to be a part of a taxpayer remedy. You can look through those, and you can look through them not just in the recent year, but if you go back in years on the state board's dockets, you'll see that the evidence that is presented is there. It's how it's presented in the record that may lead to a decision to be remanded. Because a county board wants it remanded back to the assessor to consider a specific methodology. So it goes back to the assessor, and the assessor looks at that methodology and says, okay, now I'm going to put it in the record. We've looked at it. This is why it's not appropriate. This is why cost approach is not appropriate for land value. Maybe they didn't have it in the original record, but it's in, when it gets remanded, it is. It didn't change the value, but it got remanded back to consider it, and it got part of the record. Those are the things that are complicated and part of this whole process that unless you deal with it on a day-to-day basis, you may not fully understand. So we would strongly encourage more education for the county boards of equalizations. I've made some phone calls to the Natrona County Board of Equalization after the last testimony, when there was comments that certain things could not be entered into the hearing. So we need to put them in the statutes, specifically the tax appraisals. And had conversations. Who told you that? Because every other county allows them. And the evidence in Natrona County says they did too. And so it wasn't that they weren't admitted, it was that they were deemed to be not appropriate for one reason or another. So I wanted clarification if we needed some help with legal, state board, whatever, to help them understand. And it's a different interpretation of the words is what I was given by the Natrona commissioners. I'd like to touch briefly on the valuations, and I'm sure you're all aware, but the The county valuations are public information. They're out there on the Department of Revenue website and the State Board of Equalization, and they are broke down very definitive between minerals, real property, personal property. So if you ever have a question of what was the previous value compared to this year's value, it's out there for you to look at. I apologize as well because I didn't bring those numbers for Converse County, but I can tell you emphatically in Converse County, real property went up, but my value countywide went down. And exactly as Chairman Harshman spoke, we are a heavily energy county, and that leads to the explanation. But certainly each category is out there posted on the website, and it can maybe help you understand why the total valuation went down. I would also remind you to be sure to look at whether it's an assessed value or the overall market value. Remembering that assessed value, if it was 200,000 of assessed value, that's a fractional amount. And you would have to back into and know what part of that was commercial versus industrial or all other to know what the actual market value change was. So the information is out there, but we're happy to provide it specifically if there are specific questions. Going to the bill, you know, in the essence that we're codifying law to cover what we're already doing. The first part of the bill about the statements of consideration, you know, you've heard our testimony. We support that. I really think it probably is a topic separate than this bill, but we have supported them being open disclosure. Along with that, they bring additional concerns. Are they all open disclosure? Are you going to exempt some of them? How are they going to be verified? All those things are continuing conversation for the topic of open disclosure for statement consideration. But we'll move on down the tax bill, the bill that's presented before us. In pages 4 and 5, adding all the language about what the assessor provides, the relevant information. The assessors truly just don't feel that language is needed, but if there is specific language that you want to add, you know, we're not necessarily opposed to it, but make sure you get the right language in there for everything you want. So there's no inherent thought that you're leaving something out. The current language says all relevant information. So we feel it's all covered. If there's information that's relevant to that appeal and the taxpayer asks for it and we don't share it and it becomes a part of the record during that hearing, I have confirmation from the State Board of Equalization as well as county boards. They can remand that back for consideration. So it's already in the law that we have to provide it. And if we don't, that there's a remedy for the taxpayer. On page 5, the postmark is not an issue for us. We absolutely don't have a problem with that being clarified in law. That's what we're using already. So it's not a big change for us. So codifying that is fine. The 45 days, you've heard some testimony about calendar, and I've talked about that before. Taxpayers have until March 1st to supply their personal property renditions. If they apply for an extension in writing by February 15th, that is automatically granted till April 1st. So in my county, for example, I get a lot of those April 1st. The statute goes on to say that we have until the 4th Monday in April or soon thereafter to have our notices out. We all strive to be before that 4th Monday in April, but when I get several hundred documents to enter the first week in April, it's going to take me a little time. I use a mailing service, as many assessors do. There's some lead time there, anywhere from 3 days to 10 days, depending on the service you're using. You know, meeting that 4th Monday in April is a target date. That is what the statute says. If you look at a calendar, from that 4th Monday in April to the 1st of June, when the values have to be submitted on an abstract. And by the way, those abstracts are the values that the state certifies for budget purposes. There's not 45 days. So you would be certifying if you extend that appeal period. And unfortunately, many of us have had to do that at times. If my appeal period overlaps past that June 1st, It's a nightmare for all people involved, and taxing entities and everybody. We are certifying a value that we know might be appealed. It may be a few dollars, but it may be $1 million. Because we're talking appeals for all types of property, not just the residential taxpayer. We're talking about industrials, all the properties. So the June 1st is a steadfast date. That's something that can't be changed. And then that following that June 1st is budgets, budget hearings for municipalities, for counties, advertising deadlines. It's just a rolling effect on that calendar. So you would either, if you wanted to move this 45 days, you would almost have to move up the deadline for the assessors to send the notices out. Back up from June 1st, 45 days, so that you could bump that notice date. And then you're really putting a lot of counties into a time crunch to get it all done. And you would probably find a lot more corrections that have to be made, amendments, because we didn't have all the data to get it entered. It's certainly doable, but it would just add time and money and concern for taxpayers. So that's when I'm talking about the calendar, how the 45 days impacts it. And truly, 30 days has been sufficient in the past. I mean, for many, for the 20 plus years I've been here, and my colleague, Mr. Myers, testified for the 30 some years he's been here, the 30 days is sufficient. And truthfully, taxpayers typically wait to the last 5 days. So if you do 45 days, you're going to have a bulk of some of the bigger ones come in on day 42. So it wasn't because they needed more time. It's because they wait to the last day. So we are opposed to the adding of 15 days. If it was the pleasure of this legislature to do that, then please look at the rest of the calendar to make it flow efficiently and effectively for the taxpayers and all the taxing entities that are involved. Page 6, where there's some additional words that are added to what the assessor shall exchange. And again, I just remember that at this point, we're into the appeals process. We're past the review, which is the first part of this bill, which is the review process. This is in the appeals. Again, we believe that it already says all relevant information, and we allow it in. I mean, we allow the taxpayer to provide it, and we provide it to them. Most of the time, taxpayers want a simple explanation. I have a stack that I give the taxpayer when they walk in, and it has the LEAs and all that kind of information. And I think the other assessors across the state would support that in the letters that they've given you. Taxpayer says, you're giving me a bunch of BS. I want you to sit down and tell me how you got my value. And that's what we do. So putting specifics in the law that you have added to this bill, I don't think your typical normal taxpayer is even going to understand what that is. And I have to say that this is my decision to add this right now. It's not my assessors association, but I have to be fair and honest with you. You have included a lot of information in there about land, but you heard this morning some stuff about neighborhoods. That's not even mentioned in this law. Not that I want to add to it, but neighborhood adjustments are a huge part of your value. And we're focusing on the land, and we should be focusing on the total value. And so that's one of the faults of putting specific things in statute. If you leave something out, is it inherent that we didn't have to do it? Did the taxpayer not even know they had to ask for it because it wasn't in there? You know, neighborhood adjustments are probably as important, if not more important, than the land economic boundaries, because they may be the same and they may not be. So I have to tell you that certainly.
Representative Gray, we want to make sure we got this right.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
thank you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. And I'll try and interrupt anybody, but I do want to get in the nitty gritty rather than wait, because we're getting a lot of testimony here on this one. And Mr. Chairman, Ms. Huxtable, I think that, and again, we talked about this a little bit. We added that language that it shall include but not be limited to. So exclusion from the list, and we're very clear in statute, does not mean that it's not something that needs to be turned over. Okay, and ultimately it's the county board, but we can add neighborhood adjustments to that list. And that's fine. Do you think that would be fine? But again, I want to clarify this for the committee because I do see some shaking heads on this point. Right now, it's not clear on anything. And that has been a problem in Natrona County. And we're gonna hear testimony, I think, later on that. And I know it's a contentious issue between the current assessor on whether the data was turned over, but the Assessors Association says that that's the practice. And so this is just codifying what we do already. And I think that we're at the point where a lot of people here would be more comfortable if we do that rather than just say that that's the practice, because I'm not sure it's on the ground in certain areas. And here's the thing, even if this is just native to the Natrona experience at this point, it could happen anywhere. None of us are going to be here forever. Okay. And so there will be a future Converse County assessor. Who knows what will happen? There will be a future Natrona County legislator from House District 57. I mean, none of us are indispensable. And so we're just trying to codify things that could happen anywhere. But if you could comment on just adding neighborhood adjustments to that list, and then also the fact that we said it shall include but not be limited to. Could you just talk a little bit about that and if that addresses concerns?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, whether you add neighborhood adjustments is certainly up to you. I don't think the bulk of the people will understand what that is. Like, I'm not sure that they're going to understand what a land economic area is as well. And truthfully, I understand the statement about not excluding, but it already said all relevant information. So why was that not sufficient? That's my concern. We believe, the assessors believe, that the language that was in there covered everything, and the taxpayer could ask for the land economic area, that they could ask for the neighborhood adjustments. And if they didn't get it and it goes into the record, there's ability for that to be a part of the record that it was not shared. So if you want to add the neighborhood adjustment and you understand what that means, and the taxpayer is going to understand what that means, we already share it. So it's not creating anything different than what we already do. And I understand, like I said, about the exclusion, but a taxpayer reads this and do they know what else they need to ask for?
I guess that's my point. I mean, is there a way to put it in there where the list gets shown to the taxpayer? You know, and say we use this, this, and this, but we didn't use this, this.
Mr. Chairman.
So we know what to even look at and ask for.
One of the comments made previously was to maybe put these lists, if it's possible, if you want some detailed lists, into some rules. State Board of Equalization promulgates rules about appeals. And those rules are public information. So they would be out there, and maybe that would be a place that you could put, here is a suggested list of evidentiary items that could be included. And maybe that's a better place than trying to put it in statute when some of the terms may change or be different. That was suggested once before. I would certainly leave that up to the State Board of Equalization to discuss. It's the agency that promulgates that. We will administer whatever you want to put in, but I just think that when you start adding specific things into statute, the fear that you leave something out doesn't mean it can't be asked for. But if it doesn't get asked for, then whose fault was it that it didn't get put in statutes? Do we just keep adding every year to something that we maybe could handle through rules or?
Okay, fair enough. I think we got that. We'll just keep thinking about it a little bit. Mr. Gray and then Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to say that the reason that it's important to have that in there, Ms. Huxtable, is that the Natrona assessor apparently didn't think it was relevant information, and we'll hear testimony later on that. The County Board of Equalization itself, and we're going to hear testimony on that, has not received some of this information, let alone the 3,000 plus appellees. And so sometimes it is appropriate when things on the ground are not playing out to make it clear in statute, because it's not playing out correctly in the ground. And I understand that it might not be happening in Converse County, it might not be happening in Park County at this point, but it could, because the statute isn't clear. It could, just like it did happen in Natrona County. And that's why I think it's important to have that.
Okay,
And
thank you.
you.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I I think we could maybe put Josh on a little notice that I think courts have looked at these lists in different ways. As I recall, sometimes they backfired. And I don't remember the specifics, and I don't want to interrupt the flow of testimony here. But maybe Josh, if you could think about filling us in on that at the appropriate time.
Very good. Ms. Huxtable, let's keep rolling.
Mr. Chairman. So moving on with the bill, kind of lost where we were at the bottom of page
Page
6.
yeah.
I see that draft 6 has an additional line about, excuse me, if the assessor unreasonably failed to provide the information. I'm not sure. We hadn't seen this draft when we met, and so I'm not sure how the assessors will all feel about that. It talks about if they unreasonably fail to provide the information, the county board may grant the appeal. I'm not sure what that means, and I'll let the State Board of Equalization take on that topic. And it says remand the case back to the assessor for an adjustment of the valuation. I think there's some clear authority issues about the county board setting value, and that sounds to me like they would be setting a value. So I'll let them address that, as well as getting down into, we've already talked about the appraisals, listing that in statute where it's already being done. They are already entering those into evidence, and there's certainly state dockets that refer to that. The preponderance of evidence and the presumption. I'm also going to defer that to the State Board of Equalization. The assessors have testified repeatedly that we go into these hearings not presuming that we are correct. We go into those showing the evidence that what we are defending is correct. And so if you were to change and make there be no presumption, the belief of the assessors is that both sides would still have a burden to prove their case. And the County Board of Equalization already hears both sides. If the taxpayer provides enough evidence to overcome that burden, then it shifts. That's already in the rules and in the statute. So the fact that you may want to remove the presumption from the assessor, there is still going to be a burden. I believe you've heard that from the Board of Equalization, the state board. And so there's still going to be a preponderance of evidence that's not going to change a lot from what we already do. So again, I will defer to that back to the state board and let them take on that clause. The assessors will certainly administer however this language comes out. We do have a concern with an effective date of July 1st. And I think the state board might talk about that as well. That is in the middle of appeal period. I don't know that I have a great solution. Maybe they do, the state board, but many of the appeals are not being heard until after July 1st. And so I'm not sure of a good date for that, but some of the county board hearings are still going on clear into August. Would statement of considerations be available then as public information if this was to go through the way it is? It would be a difficult thing to put into for July 1st. It may be that the first of the year is a more appropriate timeframe to capture an entire tax year. And with that, I will stand for any questions.
Okay, any other questions? Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Huxtable, on the turnover on data, yesterday we heard testimony from the county assessors that you were frustrated that you wanted to receive the data on state assessment of these wind properties, okay? And now we're here, we're trying to fix the fact that taxpayers aren't receiving the data and make clear that they are to receive certain data on their appeals. And so to me, and this has been one of the vexing things about this process is there seems to be some contradictions here, okay? And so, I mean, I understand you would like to see that data for the wind properties. Why shouldn't an appellee in Trona County, it has not been playing out. We're going to see testimony on that later. Why is that an appropriate position for the assessors now be saying that appellees can't receive information that they want? I mean, does that contradict from yesterday's?
Mr. Chairman. Representative Gray, I want to be very clear. We are not saying by opposing adding language to this bill that we should not share with the taxpayer and we should not be transparent. That is absolutely not what I'm testifying. We absolutely believe, the assessors believe that the taxpayer should have access to that information. What we're saying is it's already in the law. Just like for state assessed, we were asking to see specific items because those specific items were not in the law. And so we were asking to see all the information from those state assessed properties. That was the testimony we were giving. We weren't asking for language for specific. We were saying, give us all the data. And what we're saying regarding this bill, it's already in the law. We have to share with you all the relevant information. Why do we need to be specific with items in the law when it's already there? We absolutely, there's no contradiction in my opinion. We absolutely believe the taxpayer should have access to all the data. There is no doubt about that.
Hey, let me ask you a question about the due date. I want to shift to that for a second. About the due date, would it be possible just to make it what we call effective immediately is the time to go through the process? It's usually in the spring, then April-ish, May-ish. Is that a problem? Is that better than July 1st?
Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure that it would be, because there would be some statements of consideration that would be public and some that would not be. And again, I'm going back to the bill as it's written with the statement of considerations and the disclosure, because you would have some that would be public and some that would be not. If the effective date was before anybody's appeal process started, I think that would be doable. We would just know that the appeal process, and as I said, honestly, most of this language that's in this bill is what we're already doing. So
Right,
it's not, the dates is the big thing as far as changing from 30 to 45, and then when the confidentiality would kick in, if that was still part of the bill.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Representative Gray.
And I appreciate, I know I've been asking a lot of questions, but I'm passionate about this issue and it's important to the community I represent. Ms. Huxtable, so in absence of action by I understand your position is it's already in the statute. In Natrona, it's not happening. And people believe they lost their appeals because they didn't receive this information in a timely manner. And the appeals process became impossible to navigate. So what's the answer when it doesn't happen? Should we wait 3 years to have an election and the people's will on the current assessor be carried out if that person decides to run for re-election? Should we just let it sit there? Or should we try to clarify it in the statute? The state board doesn't appear to be weighing in on this in a way that I think is addressing it. So what are we supposed to do? Just let it keep happening? Or is your position that the data has been turned over properly? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, I truly don't believe that changing this bill would necessarily change the outcome of all those cases in Natrona County. Because the law is already there, and maybe some better education or training between the County Board of Equalization, State Board of Equalization on what their rules and duties and allowances are, what the decisions could have been written or differently, how the record could be recorded better. Because as you read some of these, some of the issues that are raised, are part of the record. It was part of the testimony. So I don't have an answer to fix all the problems that were in Natrona County. I just don't believe that what's in this bill would have fixed that problem. I think there is a various accumulation of issues that combine to make that a firestorm. And I think there's been enough evidence to show you that the system is working. Now, did all pieces of the system, would it be better to look specifically into Natrona County and see what they could have done better from the point of valuation to the point of appeals? Maybe that is appropriate, but this bill is about appeals. It's not about valuation. And that we've heard a lot of testimony today, or some about valuation methodology. This is about appeals. So maybe we need to look at that specific. I just don't think this would have would have changed the outcome for the majority of that Natrona County appeals.
Anything else? Okay, well, thank you for your testimony today. Any other elected assessors want to weigh in on this bill? County commissioners? Good morning.
Pat Meyer, Park County Assessor. I mean, I'll just reiterate what I have been saying. This is a one county problem. This hasn't gone on in 30 years. In fact, the appeal process has gotten so much better from the beginning, turning in green bar paper, trying to show manually how we came up with your value. We've just come from such a long way. And again, the main thing is the informal appeal process. When the first thing we ask is that taxpayer come see us. Is the whole key to this, is explaining the process, making them understand before they ever leave your office, and getting after their property. As soon as they come in, we don't have them file an appeal. That is way at the end. That's if we have not satisfied them. I think the only good part I see in this bill that's going to help anything is open disclosure, which we give them the sales now during the 30-day period. And even if you come in on the 29th day, that's when we have you file an appeal to stop the clock. Strictly to stop the clock, because it could take us a couple weeks to get to you and so forth. So we'll have you feel if you come in that late. Otherwise, you're already done in the normal course of action. So I don't see much in this bill. I've gone over presumption. Yeah, when we get to an appeal, we've always had to show our case anyway. So it didn't really matter. I've testified that all surrounding states the assessor has the presumption, the taxpayer has the burden of proof to get there, but we still have to prove our case. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Questions, Representative Sweeney, I think, has it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what would Park County have done with 3,000 plus? You would have been able to sit down with everybody, every single taxpayer, and
I don't believe I've ever had, Mr.
Just
Chairman.
make sure, were
Yeah.
you finished there?
if that
You're
was
okay.
the question.
Okay, go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, Representative Sweeney, we've never had more than a half a dozen appeals ever. And I haven't even had an appeal since 2017 because the informal appeal process works. Being able to explain how you came up with the value. I've never heard of 3,000 appeals. I guess it has happened to Natrona County, who I did know Tom Sutherland when he had that problem. Don't really know what happened, but it was right when we were going to market value. So everything switched. Can you imagine? We were using a 1967 cost system. All lots in Cody at one time were all valued the same way. Didn't matter where you were. So when we went to market value, things changed. And at that time, we had people lining outside the door when we first went. So that was difficult, but we've come a long way. As far as this kind of thing happening again, we've had new assessors. We have one in Teton County, which is arguably the hardest county to value. Can you imagine valuing property when the average house is $3 million? Dad, I would never touch that. They couldn't pay me enough to be the assessor in Teton County. That's just the way it is. So I've never experienced, I think there was something to Assessor Keating's testimony that Natrona County had been a mess for a long time, but nobody came in because those values could have been very well been low. I've never really got to see much of Natrona's County or look at their problems as to what happened. So I can't really say for sure, but in general, as I've testified before, you don't come into the assessor's office when you know your property's low. You just don't do it. unless you're trying to sell it. That has happened. Could you get my property up now? You know, that'll happen there. Hope that answered your question, Representative Sweeney.
Representative Jennings has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Meyer, if I'm summing this up from what you're saying, as a general rule, you see most of this as the people that they just, maybe the taxpayer doesn't understand the process. And when you, in the informal part of that, education is the answer. Is that what I'm hearing from you?
Go
ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Jennings. Yeah, pretty much. They don't like increases. Increases, even if they knew they were undervalued, they don't like it going up. And sometimes it goes up, 10, 15%. I mean, I've mentioned that Park County looks like we're going to go up a lot this year. We've had a lot of out-of-staters coming in and driving these prices high, and a lot of the real estate agents know they can get a lot more. So I expect more people to come in, and this seems to be happening statewide. Our market's growing. People want to move here and so forth. So I expect to see more inquiries, but we'll also be advertising in the papers, because most of the people I talk to on the streets, they know what what people are getting for their houses, and they just go, oh my goodness. So we're kind of warning them, and we'll be putting more stuff in the local newspapers and so forth to explain, hey, they're going up, so be ready for it. I hope that answers your questions. Representative
I think
Jennings.
we've got all our questions, so thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony. Any other elected officials? Going to move, I'd like to, obviously, the State Board of Equalization and Department of Revenue. I think go with Board of Equalization first. Yeah, let's go with the State Board. You're already here, so.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Co-Chairman is not here, members of the committee. My name is Marty Hartzog. I'm Vice Chair of the Board of Equalization, and I would be remiss if I didn't identify the chairman of the board, Ms. Jane Mockler. She's with me. And just for a little levity, I want you to know, Representative Harshman, your demeanor in a committee hearing is far different than when you're yelling at me on a football field. So I have to say, I'm going to look forward to this. And I refereed several of the Natrona County football teams. So I
don't remember that.
You had a lot on your mind. It's interesting, and I don't know if Josh was able to circulate what I sent over. I was thinking, and just so that you understand where I come from, I've worked for the state for now 23 years. I was in the Attorney General's office for 17, and I did tax. I was head of the tax section. I was deputy of the civil division. I was involved in all of the big tax cases. And it's interesting, I've been in front of legislative committees many times to talk about tax, but never local property tax issues. It was always mineral tax in front of the committees in the legislature to discuss, natural gas valuation, coal valuation, the process of appealing. And that is a segue to what I wanted to basically mention and corroborate from what you've heard. I provided a breakout of all of the appeals we've gotten over the last 10 years to the board. And about 6 to 12 a year are local property tax appeals from the entire state, all 23 counties. But every now and then we'll see a spike in local tax appeals from county boards. And this last year was one of those. 3 years ago in 2018, we had one, and it was Teton County. And it's something that you can see coming. What happens is, we are looking at all of the numbers and the statistics, and we start digging into it. And as Ms. Huxtable explained, it's not a 1 year thing. We see non-compliance 1 year, we start asking questions. And if we see a trend, then we really dig in and we come down on the assessors a little bit, and then we require that they change their practices. Teton County 3 years ago was the same thing. And if you looked at, I don't know if you have my breakout, but I think we had 21 appeals from local county boards in 2018. And so much of it was because the Teton County assessor basically dug in, was resigned because we were really putting pressure on him to do some things to get those values in the shape they needed to be. He quit. They appointed midterm the county clerk, I believe, stepped into the assessor's office and really started to make those changes. And of course, what happened is in Teton County, the values are so high anyway, but when they're undervalued and those changes start coming, you have people coming unglued because everybody who ran a business or owned a house or rented, that trickle down effect resulted in some pretty, a lot of sticker shock with their taxes. So understand that this is not unusual. It happens from time to time, but usually we get 5 to 10 appeals through the entire state. And it works very well. As Mr. Meyer explained, it's something that the assessors do well, and the process is very clear and the statutes are really pretty decent. I am only going to address a couple of items that I thought you might want to hear from me on, and I know you'll have questions, and I'm happy to give you some of the nuance. I was on a Zoom call for about 2.5, 3 hours a couple of weeks ago to talk about this, but you were not all there. So I'm happy to review some of that. But the first point again is don't overreact to a spike created in one county. It happens. You have an office in Natrona County, as Mr. Keating explained, that there were some issues. We weren't even able to see them because they were misworking their process so much that the numbers were kind of doctored. And then when we figured that out and started to understand how they were making the numbers look better, the numbers were much worse. And then we had like 4 assessors in that office over 6-7 years. I mean, the continuity wasn't there, the staff wasn't there, and the values were not maintained. And so when Mr. Keating came in and we put him under a work order, he had to start really making some improvements. Now, we said we're not going to expect you to get this 100% fixed in 1 year. We just wanted to see substantial improvement, and that's what he's been doing. The letter he wrote or read to you is the letter I wrote to him on behalf of our board, and it's true. They've made steadfast improvements, lots of change. I understand that some of those values have changed drastically, but quite honestly, they were likely way off to begin with. So let me go ahead and talk a little bit about the bill. I'm not going to try to get into the timing of the 45-day time frame. It is what it is. That's certainly a legislative call, and I would agree with Ms. Huxtable that you'll want to reconcile that with the rest of the tax calendar. It's understand that these tax appeals sometimes go way late, and we get the decisions well after October 1st, which is in the statute. But there's no consequence in the statute, so that happens, and it's unfortunate. But that 45-day or extension to 15 days could throw things off. Statements of consideration, making those a public record. I dealt a lot with the Public Records Act. I used to, as the head of the civil division in the Attorney General's office, we were responsible for administering that and advising state agencies and officers on that. I just would caution you, I think it's great that you'll make those statements of consideration public. It simplifies things in a lot of ways because then we don't have to deal with confidentiality and get non-disclosure agreements and all that. But there are some processes that are built into the Public Records Act that will make it a little less simple than you might expect. Removing the presumption in favor, and this is an abstract concept, but I'll explain it again. And Ms. Huxtable is exactly right. It does not really even the playing field. Understand that all agencies that make decisions, whoever's making that decision on behalf of a government has some kind of a presumption that he did it correctly. The law says that the courts expect that you're doing it correctly and in good faith. And so they put it upon the challenger to overcome that initial burden so that they can move the ball forward and then shift the burden back to the officer. It's really, I guess as an analogy, it's like a big speed bump. It would certainly change the way the county boards analyze the problem. It would certainly change the way we write opinions. It's a huge speed bump for the taxpayer to get over. But again, we're dealing with something, and I don't use this word too often, but esoteric, and that is the mass appraisal system. The mass appraisal system, which we use, and rightfully so, exists because, as Mr. Keating explained, 40-some thousand accounts every year have to be valued and assessed every year. You can't use fee appraisal to do that, whether you're familiar with it or not, and you like that approach, it just isn't doable. So mass appraisal brings in math and statistics and some modeling to help you do 40,000+ accounts each and every year. So what happens is if you take out the presumption, that's fine. What's going to happen is the burden is still going to be on the taxpayer to show that the assessor did something incorrectly. Now, the typical taxpayer is going to bring in the fee appraisal. This is what you heard initially from Mr. Keating. He pulled out his fee appraisal. And those are all in the record. Every single one of those is admitted into evidence. It's not that they're not admitted. That's not what happens, and that's not the concern. They're not compelling. First of all, those appraisals are often done for various different reasons, and banks request an appraisal, and they may tell the appraiser to go back and find more value because they want to make that loan, or whatever the case may be. Another analogy, if you've heard the adage, apples to apples comparison. If you're trying to demonstrate that the mass appraisal system was done wrong, the fee appraisal just doesn't do it, because the fee appraisal is based on 3 comparables and adjustments based on condition and quality. 3 comparables. Mass appraisal is based on a statistical review of entire groups of properties. And so the fee appraisal lined up next to the mass appraisal is like an apples to grapefruit comparison. One does not speak to the accuracy of the other. It just doesn't. So we've looked at cases where taxpayers have brought in several mass appraisals, or I'm sorry, fee appraisals. Maybe they're 2 or 3 years old. Maybe they're market studies. They're not full appraisals. Or they'll bring in the listing of a property that was sold maybe next door, and they'll say, how can my property be worth X when my neighbor just sold his house yesterday and it sold it for this, and they're pretty much the same. Well, again, how does that line up against a mass appraisal? It really doesn't. It really doesn't. And all the assessor then has to do is get his person, or he or she themselves can explain it, and go through the process of stratifying the property, applying abstraction or whatever technique they apply, going through the market adjustment. And the taxpayer, and believe me, we've heard many taxpayers throw up their arms with exasperation and say, I have no idea what he is talking about. This is complete Greek to me. And an outrage. And the county board then looks at each other and says, well, I feel your pain, but I don't have any proof from you, sir or ma'am, that the mass appraisal is incorrect. So yes, the fee appraisals are in the record. I have not reviewed a case in which they weren't. They're all in the record, but they're simply not compelling. It's like 2 different languages. One does not speak to the other. So if you take the presumption out, you basically remove that big speed bump. We go right into a preponderance of evidence review. The taxpayer gets up and trumpets how their fee appraisal says this, and their knowledge of parcels down the street that sold within the last 2 years, were this, so forth. And the assessor then gets up with his or her case and says, here's how we did it. Here's the statistics. Our COD is correct. Our appraisal level, we've got several metrics that we use, is right on. Here's the LEA that we used. Here's the market adjustment based on the neighborhood sales that we applied. There's the value. Now, with that really brief, 10,000-foot explanation of the appeal process, ask yourselves, who wins that case? 99% of the time, the assessor is going to be affirmed because the taxpayer doesn't understand mass appraisal. brings a fee appraisal in and says, this has to govern, this has to be the linchpin evidence. And they realize they never had a chance to begin with because they haven't understood the mass appraisal process, which has to really be in place because there's no other way assessors can value thousands of properties each and every year. So removing the presumption, I wouldn't do it. It's something that every administrative agency applies in some form to the acts of a governing body. But if you don't include it and you want to strip it out of the statute, the preponderance of evidence standard is the one we use right now. Once that presumption is overcome, once they show some evidence that make the county board say, yeah, that doesn't quite sound right, we're going to move the ball over to the assessor now to respond. Boy, the assessor has no trouble explaining. If they don't have any trouble explaining their valuation, then the ball is back in the taxpayer's court to explain how their evidence is superior to the mass appraised valuation. And there you have it. We've seen some cases where former assessors are brought in as consulting witnesses. And that's one way to go about attacking an assessment. I mean, that's because that former assessor or that appraiser who understands mass appraisal can look at that data and say, this is wrong and this doesn't seem right. And here we've got a chink in the armor for that assessment. And that's where they can make some leeway. But it's just going to be very difficult, as it really should be, for a taxpayer to prove up their case with a fee appraisal. Notwithstanding the fact that all of it is in the record, it's just not going to carry much weight. And that's the way it's been since the beginning. As far as I've looked back anyway, that's kind of how it's worked. In terms of instructing the assessor what to do, I still would not go with the language, your appeal is granted. That doesn't mean anything. I'm not sure what that is supposed to mean, but that language was added back in on this last draft. If you want to specify the various ways that the county boards can handle the case, I think that's good. I think county boards need all of the help they can get. But I would not go with the language, the appeal is granted. It's, I would stick with the more, it's on page 6 going to 7. It was added back in on this last iteration of the bill. I thought it was removed. It was removed on 5 and 6 is added back in, which is fine. I just don't know that it helps us review or the county board. Really, when a county board sends back a case and remands it for an adjustment, boy, you're in quicksand now because that assessor won't know what to do with it. The record on appeal up to us is going to be, well, I'm not sure what the assessor was required to do. And when the assessor, referring to Representative Gray's frustration, when the assessor says doesn't do anything with it and sends it back, really that order was just that they reconsider it and they can say, yeah, I did reconsider it. It's not wrong. And then you're back to square one. So I would cut that out and try to do something a little bit more clear in terms of what a county board should order and what an assessor is required to do on remand. So other than that, I think a lot of the materials in the bill are just fine. I would agree with Ms. Huxtable. All of that's in the law right now. But I think you're okay by saying if you don't provide this information that has been requested, the county board can throw it out and can not dismiss the case, but can basically give the assessor's evidence less weight because then you don't have that even playing field. Now that is in our rules right now, but Representative Gray's correct. And most of the county boards don't look at our rules, unfortunately. And let's be honest, they churn all the time. There's new county board members. They have a lot to understand. And a tax appeal is probably way down on the list of their educational process and getting ready to do these. So, and by the way, we've offered to do educational stuff for the various county boards because there's new members all the time. And sometimes they just kind of shrug at us and go, yeah, I don't think so. We want to do something else at our annual meeting. The other part of that is we don't have a budget for that anymore. Really, our budget's so bare boned at the board, unless they're right here in Cheyenne, we don't have a way to put together, to travel to county boards to do some training. So we have tried to give them that training opportunity when they're at an annual meeting or some kind of county commissioners meetings. So with that, I'll go ahead and open up for any questions. I'm happy to get into the nuances of this stuff because it is pretty involved.
Sure. Appreciate your testimony. Representative Jennings has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Hartshorn. I have 3 points that I'd kind of like you to respond to a little bit. So, because I take a little bit different point of view on this presumption. I don't have huge heartburn into that aspect of how we word it, but and I know the assessors looked at this as the presumption is for them. But I don't. I actually look at this as it's for the presiding officer. It's actually for your board. It's actually for the County Board of Equalization, so that if you go to trial, you are walking in with the presumption that you're not guilty. But in this case, you're presumed that you are. And so I want to ask you if you have some heartburn about that, because I don't see that as being addressing the county assessors at all. I see it as addressing the presiding officer. That the presumption is for you guys to not, when they walk in, just presume that the assessor is right. There's been a problem where it wouldn't have got to you in the first place. And so secondly, you know, do you have heartburn with turning a system on its ear that we've always in a court of law, and really that's kind of an extension for the Board of Equalization. You don't walk in with presumption that you're guilty. In this case, you're walking in every time that you're presumed that you're guilty. And I think you said it very well. You have the burden of understanding it well enough. And most of the time they throw up their hands and say, I don't understand this. And I understand that this particular piece of fee appraisal doesn't scratch where it itches now. And so they throw up their hands and quit. And something that I've heard repeatedly, and I'm going to bring it up probably more than once here today, is that these people didn't understand. You have some heartburn with using a system that our US Constitution, our Wyoming Constitution was designed for the ordinary citizen to be able to understand. And here we are using a system that I've heard Assessor Keating, Assessor Huxtable, Assessor Meyer, and yourself say, no one understands, only we understand. And so does that give you a little heartburn with the presumption? Just me personally. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Mr. Vice Chair.
Representative Harshman, Representative Jennings, the presumption, who is it for? I understand it's really more of the way it works. It's more of a way to order the process and to make it clear that if you're the claimant, you have to come with something to demonstrate that what you're fighting is incorrect. And all I was trying to say is, if you removed it, let's say you removed it altogether, which is what this bill attempts to do, the outcome really is not at all different. And the reason is, and ties into your third question, the taxpayer doesn't understand mass appraisal 99 point whatever percent of the time. So at the end of the day, the question isn't whether the taxpayer brought in a fee appraisal. That might be right. It might be right. The question is whether the taxpayer has evidence that the assessor did something wrong under Wyoming law. So Wyoming law says use mass appraisal. The entire institution out there called the IAAO sets up for all of the states to use mass appraisal because it's really the only way you can value tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands in some of these states, of properties each and every year. You can't go out and get 3 comparables for every single property every year. Otherwise, that would take way more staff than what assessors have. So take away the presumption and you have preponderance of evidence, which is basically who provides the most compelling evidence at the end of the day. And what you have is still a taxpayer who doesn't begin to understand the math and the statistical part of mass appraisal. It's really not for the hearing officer. It's really not for the Board of Equalization, our job. It's just to make sure that if the evidence is not there, just to move the ball over to the assessor, the case is over. So it's really an efficiency factor. If you can at least get something to indicate that what the assessor did was wrong to overcome this presumption, then there's really no reason to go throughout the rest of the case and issue long decisions going through all of the evidence and all that. It's an efficiency thing. Two, heartburn over the presumption. No, it's really purely administrative and it's there in all administrative processes will start with some kind of presumption of some kind. And it will almost always favor the decision maker. We do have in tax a presumption that favors the taxpayer. If taxpayer is challenging an exemption, and some of the appeals that we get are exemptions, is the property taxable? So if, maybe you'll remember the tax case we had out of Burns recently, they were running a daycare center out of the county property. And so they claimed an exemption and said it was a governmental purpose. They claimed that they didn't owe taxes because it was exempt, tax exempt. Those are also in the numbers of appeals that we hear. In that instance, the governing entity has to demonstrate that it is taxable. In that instance, very narrow, the government has to demonstrate that the property is taxable. And then the burden shifts to the taxpayer to rebut. So it doesn't always favor the government. It does in most cases though with valuation. And the understanding, there are many areas of regulation where it's very difficult to understand. I mean, I could look at income taxes. I do state taxes. I have somebody do my income taxes. There's lots and lots of complex areas. And in all of those, the parties have to come in and play the game under the rules of that area of expertise. It's unfortunate that taxpayers don't really understand mass appraisal, but I'm not sure as a legislative body what you would recommend as an alternative. I don't know. And so it is an uphill battle for the taxpayer. And that's why typically it's better if you have an attorney, and it certainly helps if you have somebody that understands mass appraisal to help you put your case on.
I think Representative Jennings had a follow-up.
Yeah, thank you for your clarification on that. I still look at that presumption, and I think if we're looking at that as administratively, maybe we should change our court system and everybody be presumed that they're guilty and they have to overcome the burden of that. But that's not what we've set up in this country. And it is not what we should be presuming just because it's administratively easier. And so as I look at that, it is still to the presiding officers that when that comes in, both sides have a obligation to overcome the other's objection. And so to give one heavier weight than the other, I'm still not seeing where that comes from. It's kind of a shame in our working group, we killed a acquisition study bill, and there might be others than that. But I look at two of our largest states have acquisition, and they've been found to be constitutional. And so I don't know if that's the answer or not. I would have liked to have seen the study move forward just to have some more answers to this, because I look at this and I think, boy, it's interesting that in something that really affects people's lives, I can't tell you how many times we've heard this morning that people don't understand. This affects their lives. If you're a little fixed income widow in Teton County, you can't understand why in the world somebody selling a property next door for $5 million should affect your taxes. You're taxing on an unrealized capital gains that wasn't realized. and we're taxing them out of house and home. So those things to me matter. And I think we ought to be looking at some of these other alternatives. I don't know what all is out there, but I think we should be looking at them. But I'm distressed that we would walk into any court and the presiding officer administratively should be looking at this and saying, the presumption is you're wrong, you're guilty. You don't have enough to overcome. Why not just let them both come in and just present their evidence? It just seems like there should be no presumption. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Harshman, Representative Jennings. I would be careful of mixing Fifth Amendment constitutional liberties and protections with a civil process. It's really not a good comparison. But I mean, I certainly understand where you're coming from, and it is difficult for a taxpayer to stand up to the assessor's valuation process, which he or she typically won't understand. And again, if you get rid of the presumption, that's fine. The cases are still going to be whether they carry their burden of proof. And you're going to end up pretty much where you are. It's just going to be worded differently in the decision. So, and in fact, these proceedings are never shortened. It's not like in federal or in criminal court where they ask for a directed verdict. Directed verdict is where one side goes and the defendant gets up and says, he didn't carry the burden of proving the enough evidence to demonstrate that the elements of the crime were committed. So I'm moving for a directed verdict. The judge can sit back and say, you're correct. We're ending this here. Case is over. The directed verdict is given to the defendant. That's not what happens in tax cases. They still go through the entire process. All of the evidence still comes in, whether the presumption exists or not. All that happens is it helps write the decisions in it. And it clarifies that not enough evidence was presented up front to move the burden over to the assessor, but the assessor will and their staff will still have gotten up and presented all their case. So at the end of the day, it's the same case. It's just going to change the way the answer to the case is given.
Representative Baker has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just want to be brief. So I just want to dig down a little bit more into the compelling aspect of the fee appraisal. And with an understanding that the county obviously can't fee appraise every property. I mean, that clearly we know that, right? So government to run efficiently needs a mass appraisal system. But why would we provide a system for people to go ahead and uniquely identify their property with a fee appraisal and not assume that that's going to be compelling? So I guess really my question is it, does a person have to come in and demonstrate that they understand the mass appraisal system with the fee appraisal to provide some compelling evidence that, hey, my property is unique. I understand you guys have to value 40,000 properties and, to get it done right, the assessor has to do this and it's not practical to fee appraise and require this. But we have a system that's built on lenders that rely on appraisers. And you're saying that it might be right. It could be compelling. I get, there's human aspect to all of this appraisal and putting in the numbers and maybe looking at these properties. But my question is if a free appraisal and understanding mass appraisal isn't compelling, what's compelling?
Mr. Vice Chair.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Baker. I will tell you that, I guess I could turn your question right back and say, if you had the two sitting right next to each other and you had, let's say you had an fee appraisal done in the same year, and you had the mass appraisal, which is going to look completely different, and you were on that county board and the law is instructing you, and we have what's called in the matter of appeal of Gray, which is a Wyoming Supreme Court case. And the court has come out and has said a fee appraisal does not disprove the validity of mass appraisal, does not, because they are very different. So we have that law on the books. Case came out in the late mid to late 90s. But if you had those two next to each other, let's just say you had one great looking fee appraisal and one great and a very thorough mass appraisal, how do you adjudicate that? How do you conclude that the taxpayer proved his case that the entire mass appraisal was incorrect when they don't match up at all? There's nothing you can connect. You can't face them off. You can't say, well, this is strong, but this is sort. There's nothing that allows you to do that in the two. Now, I will say that the assessors oftentimes will use fee appraisals that they get. They'll talk to bankers, they'll talk to realtors, they'll talk to title insurance companies, and they will get all kinds of data to kind of check their mass appraisals. They have all explained during our abstract meetings. We meet with every assessor every year to go over their valuations. They all use fee appraisals and different market indicators to kind of gauge how they're doing. But the question isn't whether one stands on its own and the other stands on its own. The question is whether the fee appraisal proves, now that's an important word here, carries the burden of proof to demonstrate that the mass appraisal is incorrect. And of course, it's going to have a hard time. You're going to have a hard time reaching a conclusion that the fee appraisal.
Yes, follow up. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't want to draw this out a whole lot. I just want to make sure that people understand it. And from your perspective, what would give those compelling evidence and what would reach that burden of proof? But I guess for me, my issue comes with, we have this whole system of banks and lenders that rely on appraisers and their accuracy to be current market conditions. And you're not necessarily going in and trying to invalidate the whole mass appraisal system. That's not what you're doing. You're saying that in this instance, my property is represented by this. It's not saying that the 40,000 other properties that it's valued is inconsistent with anything. It's saying that I'm uniquely identifying my property. So what I guess I'm just a little bit confused as far as moving forward. I understand the reliance on the mass appraisal and the law dictates, but we also have a system that's what we're talking about, this appeal process that allows you to take in a preponderance or compelling evidence. So I guess, what would 2 fee appraisals, would that be enough? I mean, what standard would be compelling to justify that, hey, we're not trying to invalidate the mass appraisal system. That's not what I'm here to do. I'm not here to invalidate the 39,900 other properties, right? That you keep mentioning. We've got to do it, right? I'm here to talk about my property, uniquely compelling here, the board. So what would be compelling evidence?
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Baker, I don't know. It would depend on the case. It would depend on the facts. It would depend on whether the assessor followed the rules. And there are a substantial set of rules in how they mass appraise. You can dig into those. The taxpayer can dig into those. My difficulty, and I think the board's difficulty and the Wyoming Supreme Court's difficulty in addressing that very question was, how does one prove that the other is wrong? Appraisals are not an exact science. We know this. There's lots of ways that an assessor can go right after that fee appraisal. First of all, if it's not contemporary with the valuation, you got a huge problem right there. You can disagree with the comparables used. You can disagree with a lot of aspects of a fee appraisal. And so I don't know if you had 5 appraisals and they were all done. I mean, I can't tell you what crosses the threshold and carries that burden.
Okay, going to thank you. We're going to move down to Senator Schuler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my question, I probably should have directed this towards one of the assessors, but while they were here, I had a gentleman just last week contact me about, his fees going up, and I think he understood completely what a mass appraisal is, because I said, have some of the folks around you been selling their homes? And he goes, yeah. They've been selling them for a lot. And he goes, yeah. I said, well, that's it. And he goes, I know. I said, well, you can always go in and visit with the assessor. Well, she's just going to tell me the same thing, and, blah, blah, blah. And I said, there's a whole process in place. I went through, how they can appeal later on to the county board and so on. But he understood. And I guess my question is probably pretty simple. Do you think that the statutes and the rules that we have in place right now do enough to protect the taxpayer and give them the due process they need? Or do we really need this bill? Is this bill just something that is attempting to fix something that maybe really isn't broken? I guess that's the question I have. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Schuler, I think that the bill reflects a somewhat an overreaction to what they're seeing and some upset taxpayers, because if we really had the problems that this is trying to fix, our numbers would be way different. I don't know if you have my handout. I've got a few here, but it's our appeals, the number of appeals that get to us, 5 to 12 roughly a year. And I think that what happens is you get a new assessor with new people, and some of the processes aren't as smoothly applied, and people get really angry at the change in their value. And then it's on them to try to demonstrate that they were prejudiced by some breach of law, and they struggle with that. And of course, if you have 3,000 or whatever it is, it looks terrible, but let's keep it in perspective. We're talking about an occasional spike like this from one county. For the last, since we went to market value, we've had very few of these. The only reason we're talking about this, not mineral taxes, which is why I usually am in front of a committee, is because of this one hotbed. And they're doing their best. They're trying to get it turned around, and people are going to have to be patient, but I get that they're upset. So I don't know that this is going to fix too much. As Ms. Huxtable said, all of this is pretty much already in the law. And it's just the circumstances here that seem to demand some kind of action, but probably isn't necessary.
Okay, we're going to try to wrap. Keep moving. Okay, Representative Gray.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I got to weigh in here a little bit, but I want to be careful, but I understand the state board weighing in on the interpretation of the way the statutory changes, how they would play out. But why does the State Board of Equalization, as the umpire here, think it's appropriate to weigh in on statutory changes and some of the way that just occurred and some of the things that came out in the testimony? I mean, I just think that the state board's powers are laid out in the Constitution, and I really question whether it's appropriate. It's proper for the board to be weighing in on whether a statutory change is. And look, I'm not just trying but the state board has a certain umpire sort of thing here, and so that's my question. Why do you think that is an appropriate power of the state board? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, let's be clear. I asked the state board to come testify, about and give the opinion about this bill in our working sessions. I specifically did that.
I understand, Senator Case, but to ask whether to weigh in on whether it's appropriate or not, I think is another angle. And look, we can just leave it out there, but I just think,
Yeah, and I think appreciate you being here. Do you want to respond to any of that, or?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, and Representative Gray, I would just say I've represented state agencies, and the legislature has at times shut down state agency testimony, and that's fine. It does help, though, to give a perspective that the assessors don't have, because we see it, of course, months after the process is played out in front of the assessor. We see it in a record. We see it, as evidence and arguments in legal applications of law. And so it is fairly complex, and we are Wyoming's tax court. That's what we are, executive branch agency, but we also serve the function as a regulator of assessors on the equalization side. We have two hats. And so I guess I would just leave it at that. I don't know. I think we have a pretty comprehensive understanding of how this process plays out and how it works from not just a day-to-day process, but constitutionally. I looked at all of these in the past, because we do get constitutional challenges as well. So I don't know. It's up to you folks if you want to hear from us. But
Yeah, no, we appreciate you being here. Appreciate your service.
Thank you.
And I think are there any other I think we're going to
Mr. Chair, I do want to say something.
You have another question?
Mr. Chair, I don't want anything to be misconstrued. I think it's fine, to get interpretation of the testimony of the statute, how it would play out. And I do appreciate them getting here, but I do think that the umpire element of the state board does, so that's all I'm saying.
Yeah, appreciate your opinion.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Oh, online, I forgot. Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I have a question for Mr. Hartzog. So, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Hartzog, thank you for joining us. And I do appreciate you actually bringing up the context of Teton County that happened. I believe the work plan was first ordered in 2016, middle of 2016. We had an assessor that had been elected a couple years ago. But the work plan was about assessments that happened all the way back into 2011, where they just didn't change, right? And so once that work plan had been in place, a year later, the assessor resigned, and now we have our current one. I love our current assessor. I was proud to be part of the nominating committee for her. She used to be a deputy clerk, and I think she does a great job. But it is, for all the jobs that people say that our job is thankless, their job is truly thankless, to determine how much money they pull out of someone's pocket and then still have to run for election at the same time. My question for you, so you pointed out that this kind of happens after state board's work order or work plan, where they have to start equalizing again. And so you get a whole bunch of people who just see their taxes jump up. And I'm curious if there's anything in this bill that you think that would help prevent that from happening again. Is there anything, any one of these reforms that would help taxpayers realize, or maybe even help us just make sure that we stay uniform overall, to prevent this spike every single time there's a work order, so we don't have this come up when it happens to another county?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Yin, I don't think anything in this bill addresses that. And just understand what happens is when that work order comes down, it's gotten really, really bad. Before that, we issue what are called work improvement plans. Those are informal. They don't go out to the public and they don't have a big number on the top. They're just letters, and they say, they indicate to the assessor, look, you've got some issues here. Please focus on some of these. And so we don't get to the work order until that has not worked. And then it's really up to the assessor as to how they get it done. It may take years, and I think it usually does take years. The problem is by the time we get to a work order, the numbers are so bad that really any corrective action is going to be, is possibly going to reflect or create a fairly stark change to the tax liabilities going out. And that's just the nature of the beast. In Teton County, we had an assessor that dug in and says, I'm not going to do it because I don't want to have all the millionaires and billionaires in front of me with their attorneys just taking me to the woodshed. I hate to use it, but that's exactly what happened. And so when we said, not only are you going to do it, we're going to step in if you don't, because it's our responsibility to make sure you have uniformity and everybody, all the counties are working the same way. Then he quit. And the next assessor, just wonderful job to come in and deal with a very difficult problem. But you know what the reaction was and the changes that were made. But understand that whenever we send a letter out in the beginning, oftentimes the taxpayers never realize it. But to answer your question specifically, this bill does not in any way address that problem.
Very good. Well, we appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you,
for
members
your work.
of the committee.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, any other, I think Department of Revenue, do you want to? No? Okay, we're moving on to any other folks, any public testimony on this bill? Any testimony on this bill? Okay. Is there anyone online? And we'll maybe get those kind of queued up, and we'll do folks in-house first, but so come on forward. We actually have 4 seats up here. We can get folks lined up here, and then we'll move to online once we finish. So is, Amor, did you drive down today?
Nope, yesterday.
Yesterday, okay, good. Anyone else that would like to testify? Just show of hands out there. Come on up. Fill up these 4 seats, just so I kind of got an idea of what we're looking. Okay, so it looks like you 3 in the room. How many online? 3? Okay. Well, good morning. Just introduce yourself, where you're from, who you represent.
Chairman, co-chairman. Thank you, members. My name is David Carpenter. I'm a Natrona County resident, part of the public that knew absolutely nothing about mass appraisal until very early 2020. Just a little bit about my background. I have a degree in business economics. I consider myself sort of a data nerd. I dive into data, clean it up, do data mining. And so when I got into it, what first caught my attention is my street. And I'm not going to touch on Natrona County too much here, but what got my attention was my particular street, which has some houses with very small lots, 8,000, 10,000 square feet, and then other houses that have over an acre. One of mine being one of those. And my assessed value went from about 290,000 to just under 800,000. And so being the data nerd that I am, I wanted to see the big picture. So what I did is I jumped on the website. Just a little more background. I'm a former landman. So I'm very, very familiar with the websites, assessors websites, and land and property in general, valuations and everything. And so what I did was you were able to download CSV files of all the data, and that provided me 2019 and 2020's data. And I ended up putting together I think it's around 64,000 accounts, which basically covered the entire land value of Natrona County. And the things that I saw in there were very bizarre from the get-go. My area was one that was very, very peculiar, but what really got my attention was other parts of the city where there was neighborhoods with very similar houses, very similar properties, but if there was a property that had exactly 1 acre, they were valued at around $1.73 a square foot. And anything under that 1 acre, if it was 0.9, 0.95, that was valued at $10 a square foot. And now you can see it was very simple. You could see that someone with the same size house and the same property within 0.1 acres, they were all of a sudden getting charged $1,000, $1,500, $2,000 more in taxes a year based on this. And I don't know if it had something to do with mass appraisal or just bad regression analysis. I'm not sure what was happening there, but that's the same concept that happened in my neighborhood, and it happened in the Heights, it happened in Meadowview Estates, it happened all across the county. And so yes, there was some sticker shock, but there was also major problems, and it had to do with the mass appraisal and at least how it was being done in the county. And so to move on, I just kind of want to get to this bill a little bit and get away from the county because we've beat that horse to death for about 16 months now. Really it comes down to, and it's been said a lot today, and some of you guys have mentioned it as well, the public doesn't know about mass appraisal. I was very quick after looking at this to realize that I was in over my head, and I was fortunate enough to find this lovely lady next to me, Mrs. Barlow. And she started to shed light on a number of the problems that were actually going on, and I hope she speaks to a lot of that here soon. At the end of the day, it comes down to allowing the public to play with the same deck of cards that these guys are. And we're not getting that. We're not getting all of the information. In fact, I would contest that the process and everything about it right now is even less transparent than it was in 2020. Natrona County's assessor has spent a great deal of time and money revamping the website to essentially eliminate what I did in 2020. I can no longer download CSV files. It's one individual account at a time. And you cannot, to my knowledge, I don't think you can get 2 years worth of data anymore. So that's out the door. I can no longer look at that. It would take me 6 months on my own to probably put together an analysis of the county that I did in 3 days. And so at the end of the day, it is really about, being allowed to having some transparency, which I think we do cover in this bill, and also being given the same information. We want to see all the sales, and the public can figure this out. We shouldn't have to get attorneys for a $2,000 tax bill. I'm going to be honest with that. But at the end of the day, property can be seized from us. And it's a private property issue, right? There's a lot of things going on here, and it means a lot to everybody. And I do believe this is a statewide issue and it needs to be dealt legislatively. But at the end of the day, we need all of the information again, and I'll say it again. We need all the sales. We need even the sales that they did not include in their analysis. We need the actual analysis to be able to look at what they're doing. If we don't have all of this information, we lose. And that's the bottom line. And I'll leave it at that and let someone that knows a little bit more about this talk here soon.
Specific comments on the bill too? You've seen the bill, any other?
I think it's a great step in the right direction. I don't know that it completely solves the problem, but I think it's a major step in the right direction for us. It opens up transparency. If I was to touch on one thing, and I think Ms. Barlow will also touch on this too, it's some of these little words in here. The county assessor shall, upon request, disclose information sufficient to permit identification of the real estate parcels. That word sufficient, who's defining that word? Is it going to be the assessor? And if so, I'm not sure that maybe we just eliminate that word. Because we're going to need all the information, not just what they deem sufficient.
Okay, any questions, Mr. Carpenter? Okay, well, it's nice to see you again and appreciate you traveling down here
Good
to
to see you.
participate. Representative Gray has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Carpenter, thanks for coming. And I'll ask this of Ms. Barlow too, but can you talk about the data issue, the exchange of data with the assessor's office? I think that you think about the presumption, that's a key reform here. I do disagree with the State Board of Equalization in terms of the statutory construction. I think the statutory construction removes the presumption. You can talk about Chevron deference at the federal level, whether we have that at the state level. I'd probably get into that more in the discussion in the bill, but and I'm going to probably ask Mr. Anderson about it. But I think we're there in terms of the statutory construction. Now, if the system is still stacked, even when we pretty clearly put it in statute, where they're still going to say there's a presumption, that's a deeper problem. But I don't know. But I think the language in that is pretty clear. So we've got that reform. Then we've got the exchange of data. Can you talk more about that? Because I think it's very important in how that interaction happened in the Natrona County experience. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Chairman Harshman, Representative Gray, thank you for the question. The 30 days is, at the end of the day, I believe we received in Natrona County some of our packets right around the end of September, early October, and then all of our hearings were in November, early November. We've beat on this a lot today that the public doesn't understand this process. And, to come in that late with the information and to not really provide all of the information that we would need to actually go up against someone that does have all that information, we just don't have a chance. We requested a slew of information. I think there was probably 10 items on each request that we put together. And to my knowledge, I don't know that we got even half of those. There was some stuff in there that was worthwhile, but at the end of the day, there was never enough information to be able to perform our own analysis and really defend our cases.
Okay, well, thank you. Appreciate it. And who's next? Oh, okay. Representative Hallinan online here. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for the gentleman. Number one, did he appeal his case to the county board, and how did they decide his case? And what does he think the appropriate amount of assessment for his property would be? So with those two questions, I would appreciate, Mr. Chairman. Thank
Okay,
you.
Mr. Carpenter.
Chairman Harshman, Representative Hallinan, thank you for the question. My particular case was, I believe our assessor reduced my value down to approximately 450,000. Which at that point I had, there were many other cases that we were working on. I was helping other people appeal that were a little bit less knowledgeable of the data and everything behind it and the resources. And so my focus kind of became on other properties and helping Ms. Barlow put together kind of a larger picture case here. So my case was left at 450,000. And honestly, at the time I felt it was a little high. If I was to look back today, I would probably say it's pretty spot on. The interesting thing about that though is, and this actually goes countywide. So my value went from the 290 to 790 and then down to 450,000 between 2019 and 2020. What happened in 2021 was, without question, I received my tax statement and I was back down to around 285,000, which I would say is low. But, and this is indicative of the entire county, what you have seen is from 2019 to 2020, there was a massive increase in the entire property value that Mr. Sweeney was trying to get numbers on earlier, and I think we can provide those here soon. And then in 2021, from 2020 to 2021, there was actually a readjustment back down. And so it kind of baffles my mind that we could somehow have stayed in compliance from 2019 to 2020 and then now 2020 to 2021. I hope that somewhat answers your question.
Doc Hallinan, good. Okay. Representative Sweeney's got a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So thank you, Mr. Carpenter, for those comments. So what happened to you in 2020? And thank you for enlightening a number of Natrona County residents on the process and how that all takes place. But what happened in 2020, you're just commented on, and I kind of asked the county, our county assessor, the same similar question on what happened in 21 that you just alluded to. Do you believe that was with the State Board of Equalization's blessing?
Go ahead.
Chairman Harshman, Representative Sweeney, thank you. So are you referring to 2021 when you say the state board's blessing? I'm not sure. I don't think I should speak to that. It's just very curious to me that we could have all of a sudden fixed all the problems between 2019 and 2020, and then all of a sudden come back and regress back to, almost back to 2019 numbers where, and I'm going to let her speak more to those numbers in precision, but basically it was about 45 million, 2019 to 2020, the total value, the total assessed value. And then it went back down about another 22 million in 2021. And I'm not sure what happened there, but the fact that between 2019 to 2020 and then 2020 to 21, all of a sudden they can still be in compliance they got into compliance in 2020 and then they're still in compliance in 2021 is beyond me. It doesn't make any sense.
So
Follow-up?
just a quick follow-up. So were you in the room this morning when Assessor Keating read the letter, which I took was fairly current, not a year ago, that the State Board of Equalization says he's doing a fine job. And they must have given the blessings on the 21 assessment. That's what I was curious about.
Okay,
Chairman
kind
Harshman,
of a question in there. Okay, go ahead.
Representative Sweeney, I was in the room. Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious to know how many of those letters have actually been sent out to county assessors over the years. You know,
Okay, any other questions? I'm gonna. Representative Hallinan, do you have another question?
No.
Okay, thank you. Okay, who would like to be next?
Mr. Chairman, my name is Steve Schaus. I'm from Casper. This is all new to me, so I feel like a country bumpkin come to, big town. I live in
really
Casper. I own
appreciate
a
you.
Riverside Mobile Home Court there
Yeah.
in North Casper, and I'm just here as an unhappy taxpayer. When I first got my tax notices, my tax assessed value went from, say, 900,000 up to over $4 million. And it was like a shock. I went and talked about that. And everything, was good on that. So I contacted Miss Barlow and on the appeals process and all that. I had paid for an appraisal with Deb Clark with Rocky Mountain Appraisal. And she did an appraisal on my property there at Riverside Mobile Home Court there in North Casper. And I took that into Matt Keating to show him, and he pushed it back at me and said, I don't even want to look at it. They don't know what they're doing. And it was kind of a shock to me, that he wouldn't accept somebody else's assessment on a piece of property and appraisal, even look at it to say, okay, this has some valid points on it and everything else. And find out that the attributes on my property, one of them, the main ones on there is it's in 70–80% of it is in a FEMA floodplain. And that was removed from on there. So it was assessed as not having any of those attributes that, took down the property values. And so that all got reinstated, and, I had my protest and everything done. And we settled out of the protest thing on there and come to a happy conclusion on most of that. But I've got one little piece of property that's 1.32 acres. And it was the previous year, it was assessed at 25,000. And the next year it was assessed at $207,000. No water, no sewer, no electric, packed full of garbage. It's just a bare piece of land. And, that's kind of a shock, and then to find out that my comparables were with the Luker development in McMurray Business Park on the east side of town. That's kind of a shock, being in North Casper. And historically, North Casper's been low income, elderly, minorities, and property values have all been reasonable. But so to have my property values go up so tremendously is just a shock. And I look at these changes in here. They're not big major changes, but there's some things that need to be done, and it's not going to hurt. Everything changes over time. So basically, that's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks for being here. Really
Yeah.
appreciate your testimony. Members of the committee, any questions? Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Schaus, thanks for being here. Can you talk about your appeal, how it went, a little bit more about how the appeals process went?
Go ahead, Mr. Shaw.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray. I went in and, I asked for, why all this went on and stuff, and he said, well, he just looked at me and matter of fact, so you just have to file an appeal. And so I said, well, what do I need for that? And so I waited and stuff. And at best my knowledge, I never received a lot of stuff until I contacted Miss Barlow and as my representative. And then she was given a lot of information, which then I was given. And it just didn't seem like it was very forthcoming on my part as a taxpayer, getting stuff that should be mine to receive information.
Okay, any other questions? Mr. Shells, appreciate your testimony. Okay,
So thank you all.
yeah, thank you for being here. Did you drive down this morning or?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, okay, well, I'll race you going home.
Yes.
Okay, well, appreciate you taking your time out of your day to drive down here. Ms. Barlow. I think we're gonna finish. You want to go last? Is that what you'd like to do? Okay, we can move online. That's fine. Who do we have? Judith?
Mr. Chairman, we have Dave Divis, Sweetwater County Assessor.
Okay, very good. You hear us? We can see you.
Mr. Chairman, can you hear me as well?
We can hear you. Welcome.
Okay, my testimony, you had asked just before Mr. Hartzog had left for any other assessor comments, and that's when I raised my hand. Do you want me to wait to another point, or is it this point in the hearing okay?
You're fine. We just didn't see that, and apologies. You're fine. We appreciate you hanging with us. Just go ahead and introduce yourself for the record and where you're from, who you represent.
Okay, I'm Dave Davis. I'm the Sweetwater County Assessor, and I'll be speaking today as the Sweetwater County Assessor. Our legislative committee has testified very, very well in front of the group. A couple of things that I think are just getting missed or haven't been mentioned enough in detail is the presumption that's in the law. In my opinion, I think that's because the assessors have the data. The taxpayer may have some information, but the assessors have all of the current cost tables that are provided by the Department of Revenue. We have a very, very robust computer assisted mass appraisal system. And we also have access to all the sales. So in my opinion, the presumption should be with the side that has more data. And in that situation, I think that is the county assessor. I do think there's a misconception here also that mass appraisal is something that the general public just has no ability to understand. And I just disagree with that. When a taxpayer comes into our office and sits down, they may not understand mass appraisal when they get there, but at the time they leave, they do. And I think that's evidenced by the small amount of appeals that you see going to the State Board of Equalization. When we sit down with taxpayers in our county and we take the time to explain it, sometimes it takes 10 minutes and sometimes it takes 2 hours and 10 minutes. But when those taxpayers leave, they do understand mass appraisal and they understand what we're working with. One of the big advantages with our mass appraisal system is if we get to the point where we have to explain sales and show them sales, they actually see the compliance numbers that we're required to meet with the Department of Revenue and the State Board of Equalization. For their specific neighborhood and their specific property, they get to see the sales that are actually we're being used, and they get to see the compliance information at the bottom. All of the statistical requirements that Mr. Hartzog spoke of are on that report, and they get to see how we're valuing those properties. As far as appraisals go, they may not be considered against mass appraisal as far as one being right and one being wrong. The way I've always explained it to taxpayers is appraisals are opinion of value. And that fee appraisal is no different than it's an opinion, just like my mass appraisal value is an opinion. And I do think once we explain the difference between the two, the taxpayer is okay with that. Now, where an appraisal will be an advantage to an assessor is they may provide data that we don't necessarily have. A lot of times when we're out inspecting property, we don't get to go inside. The fee appraiser does. So we are not aware of basement finish levels. We have an idea and we've had information over time, but that information can change. So that appraisal does give us information that we can use to value that property, not just to jump to the value, but to help us use the mass appraisal system to make sure the characteristics of the home are correct. Those are my points that I would like to make. And I will reiterate what Assessor Huxtable had said, or what she had said earlier. I do not believe the system is broken. I do not believe the taxpayers in Sweetwater County, the ones that I am familiar with, come in here and do not get treated with respect. Everything that we do is transparent. I will explain it to them until it's dark. I don't care. When they leave, they will understand what we did. Now, they may not always agree with the value, but they know what we did was fair and we're treating everybody the same. And that goes with the improvement value, which would be all the buildings, but it also goes with the land value. We can pull it right up on our county map program, and we can actually show them the other homes in the area, how we've got quality and condition uniform in the neighborhood. We got the land value the same way. It is a very transparent process, and the taxpayers of Sweetwater County, I think, are getting the treatment that they deserve. And I would like to reiterate one other thing. I do think this tone of this legislation makes the assessor the bad guy. And I don't appreciate it. And I think it's not fair. I do think this is a one county issue, and Natrona County will get corrected. It's 40,000 parcels, so it's not going to happen overnight, but it will get corrected, give it enough time. Thank you for the time, Mr. Chairman, and I would answer any questions.
Okay, well, thank you. And we do have a question, Representative Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I just have a couple of questions there. What I thought I heard you say was that you believe that more data equals the presumption to go on the side of but then I also heard you say that sometimes the data is incomplete. So what if the data is wrong or incomplete? Then where does the presumption go? And how do you determine that? If you walk into a court and you're presumed that you're guilty, now you have to overcome that hurdle. And by your own admission, there may be incomplete or wrong data. I mean, it happens. I don't see that. And again, the presumption, I don't know if you were on when I talked about this with Mr. Hardzong, but I see that as going to the presiding officer, that they're not to be prejudiced when that case comes before them. I think his response back was this is civil, but our civil should come from our basic core principles through our Constitution. You're innocent until proven guilty. So if by following this logic, if I'm listening to you correctly, if I show up in a case and I have more data, I'm just presumed right. So could you speak to that a little bit more?
Okay.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Jennings, I do believe the presumption is for the assessors because we do have more data. And everything you're talking about, I think there's two steps to this that need to be very distinct. There's a conversation with the taxpayer that happens when they bring their assessment in and they sit down at my desk. Okay. Everything's open at that point. There is no presumption at that point. We're having a conversation to make sure that the data I have is correct. And we're looking to make sure that the data that I have is complete. Now, again, that's a conversation. That's not an appeal hearing. That's me asking questions on the finish of the basement, the quality. Do they have any subsidence issues? Do they have any flooding issues? I mean, there's a lot of things that can change their individual value that the mass appraisal system just cannot account for. But when that taxpayer comes in, and that's why that we have that 30-day window to appeal, that's the point where we can correct that data. It doesn't have to get to an appeal. And I would argue that 9 times out of 10, it doesn't. Now, Natrona County had issues, but in the other 22 counties, I think those issues that you're talking about are resolved long before anybody ever asks for appeal documents. And I can tell you, I have talked to, I'll say, hundreds of taxpayers since 2012 when I moved into the office. I haven't been the assessor that long, but I've been the chief deputy and then the assessor since 2018. And I have never had a single taxpayer leave wanting appeal documents. They appreciate the conversation. I've had multiple taxpayers tell me they had no idea they were going to talk to the assessor today. They thought they were going to come in and fill out a form or make an appointment or have to go through some bureaucracy. When they can actually sit down with the elected official that makes the decision on that value of that property, they are very grateful for that. Now, we have had at times had to go out and confirm data. We may have had an appraisal or a taxpayer who said, no, my house isn't that big. We've got the wrong square footage. We'll have to actually send field crew personnel out to actually revalue the property. And that's happened multiple times. And basically, we're just breaking the tie. We think we have good numbers, but if the taxpayer has different information, we give them the benefit of the doubt. We make an appointment. We go out and confirm that. Sometimes we're right. Sometimes they're right. Mass appraisal leads itself to have things outside the bell curve slip through the cracks. But for the most part, we're pretty good at what we do. And I think in most cases, the taxpayers, they don't have to go to the appeal process to get due process. That conversation we have with them in the review time, that's where we really try and get it right. And I think almost all of us do. The intent is for all of us to get it right for those taxpayers. I hope I answered your question.
Okay, very good. Any other questions? Please, Assessor Davis, really appreciate you joining us today. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, next online.
Next, we have Dave North from the Natrona County Board of County Commissioners.
Okay. My neighbor.
How are you doing?
I can hear you, but I can't see you.
Well, I'll see if I can fix that. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you,
Commissioner,
Mr. Chairman.
please introduce yourself and who you represent.
My name is Dave North. I am a Natrona County Commissioner and have sat through a series of BOE hearings over the last year. And I just wanted to bring up a few of the concerns that we have up here.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, we appreciate you joining us. So go ahead. The floor is yours.
All right, I appreciate it. I was planning on coming down this morning, but with the weather, I changed my mind and I decided to sit in on the Zoom meeting. So hopefully everything works well as far as technology goes. I haven't had real good luck with this in the past. So to start out with, after listening to the testimony that's already come up this morning, listening to the various assessors, I do understand what they're saying. But the things haven't been followed in Natrona County that they say that are already implemented. And that's where the problem comes in, is that we need some clarification so that we can get the assessor to go ahead and follow through with things and present evidence to the taxpayers to explain to them what's going on and why their assessments are the way they are. We need transparency. You know, that's one of the big things that our government lacks in a lot of areas. And the taxpayers, yes, they need to have that ability to be able to be explained to what they're doing. But at the same time, the assessments need to be fair across the board. One of the things that was said this morning, and I'm not going to pick on a lot of stuff, but we ask as the Board of Equalization specifically for maps of LEAs for Natrona County. We also requested, and we were told that we couldn't use Eagle View to look at the specific properties and look at the different ones. We were denied that. We can't make a well-educated decision without all the information. That's the problem that we're having. If you don't share that information, if the assessor is not willing to share that information, and from what I've heard about the other assessors throughout the state, that's one of the things they sit down and do. They make sure that the taxpayers are given all that information. We need to make sure that we have that also as the Board of Equalization, because we can't make educated decisions. We can't follow through and take care of what needs to be taken care of and send things down to the State Board of Equalization or remand it back to the assessor if we don't have all that information. So the taxpayer is put on an unfair playing field in that advantage. Chairman Harshman, you wouldn't put your team against a bunch of peewee football players. That would be kind of an unfair advantage. And that's kind of what's happening to a lot of this. We've had areas that have been included, recent developments within the last 5 years that were completely put into a bigger LEA. They have a multiplier of 1.96 of them because they're outside of the MPO within Natrona County. And yet there were more than 5 sales in that area, and yet they had a 1.96 multiplier on it. It's not fair for people to be taxed for an additional $400,000 on their property when it's a brand new property and they've got appraisals to show that. So that's a disadvantage that we have. Valuations need to be addressed. And I understand that mass appraisal is a complicated issue. But if you sit down and explain it to people why and how they're being appraised, then it does take a lot of that problem away. When we have taxpayers that come in and say that the only way they can get information is by filing an appeal before they can even get the information of why their taxes were assessed the way they were, that's not fair to the taxpayer. That's not fair to the Board of Equalization. That's not fair to any of the counties throughout the state. And it doesn't really, we can't legislate against all things. I mean, there's no way in the world. We look at what's happened on the federal level and how we get these micro managers that go in there and try to do things. And I'm not suggesting that we do that. But when the assessors say we're already doing all these things that are proposed in this particular bill, then what's the issue about putting them in there? I do agree that we need to expand the 30-day to 45 days. I understand also that next year, because it goes into effect on July 1st and all the appeals go out earlier than that, then that's going to create some issues for the assessors also. But the taxpayers need to be given all this information. They need to be sent out their packets when they're developed, not at the last minute, not right before the timeline is due. And that's what happened this last year. We had taxpayers that had filed their appeals that didn't get their appeal information until at least a week after. I mean, the mail stamp was at least a week after the date that they were supposed to be sent out. That has to change. And with our current mail system, if you guys rely on it for timely delivery, then you've got more faith in it than I do. I haven't seen things get delivered on a regular schedule. And so I'm a little concerned about that. I heard evaluations being talked about as far as acquisition prices. Yes, there are areas, there are big states that do that. And I've had people in the assessor's office tell me, well, that's not fair and equitable. Well, it is fair and equitable. If you're on a fixed income, but you know what your property taxes are going to be, then it's fair. If you're talking about mill levies, the mill levies have always been there. That doesn't change. That's something that, yes, we can look at all that stuff, and yes, we do approve it. But when you turn around and you add a multiplier onto people's properties that doubles what their value is in their tax assessment, there's a problem with that. That's not fair and equitable. That's completely against what our state constitution says we should be doing. We ought to be putting things across the board and making sure that every one of the taxpayers have the opportunity to not only understand how they're being taxed or why they're being taxed, but also the ability to go through and talk about how we need to correct this. And yeah, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of things that have been brought up, and I know a lot more about mass appraisal now than I ever thought I would after sitting in on so many different hearings. And I understand the assessor's job. And I'll tell you, that is one position that I would never want to have.
Commissioner, we have a question for you. Representative Jenkins has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner North, I want to change the thought here just a little bit and just ask you a question, because we won't have a statistic or anything of that. It is suppositional, but you guys, with your association of commissioners, I'm sure you guys talk about this because you're all the Board of Equalization. How many commissioners do you think, feel very uncomfortable with the lack of knowledge that they have of dealing with this mass appraisal?
I think the biggest problem with that is that when you only have 5 or 6 appeals a year, it's not a big deal. But when you have 3,000 in one year, then that's where it changes. I think that's when people become more uncomfortable with the situation. You can sit down and look at everything if you only have 5 or 6 pieces of property that you're worried about. But when you have that many and you're clumping huge chunks of land into one LEA, that's where it makes it more difficult, because you're not necessarily comparing apples to apples. We've got brand new properties throughout the state or throughout the county up here that have brand new appraisals that are less than a year old, that are brand new properties. The houses have just been built. And I think that's something that they need to start looking at. And I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, sure. Any other follow-ups or?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, Commissioner North, what I was really wanting to ask there, or what I was wanting to get at, was you mentioned that you are more comfortable with it now that you have been educated because you have all those appeals that come before you. But how many of your commissioner friends around the state are uncomfortable with their lack of education on this matter? I understand that if it was 4 or 5, they can muddle through that and they can spend more time on that. But how many of them do you feel like are comfortable with their level of education on this across the state in 23 counties?
Without the statistics and without an exact number, I would say that the majority of commissioners aren't comfortable with it, because most of us are not realtors. Most of us are not lawyers. And when you start going through and looking at that information and how convoluted mass appraisal can get and what you're looking at and trying to compare different properties, it can be very complicated. And that's one thing that I would love to have a little bit more education, whether it's a Zoom meeting or whatever else. I think that would be great.
Okay, I think we have a couple more questions. I'm going to go to Representative Hallinan is online, and then Representative Ian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was kind of disappointed to hear from Mr. North that he doesn't feel comfortable with the county boards of examiners. And I also am disappointed to hear that he thinks that the assessor isn't doing his job in Natrona County. Because if he's not doing his job, maybe the problem is just replacing the assessor. And then you would have a golden field in front of you. So I'm kind of disappointed to hear that but he feels that the assessor is not doing his job, and he doesn't feel that his county boards are able to assess these areas. So what is the answer to this problem? It's just to have the Board of Equalization do all of the assessment in our state. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, and I'm going to ask Representative Yin to ask his question too, and then you can go ahead, Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner North, appreciate your service. And, this is having to deal with 3,000 appeals sounds like work that I'm glad that I'm not doing. So I appreciate your work on it. So what I would say, my question to you is essentially, which of these reforms do you think would be best for leveling the playing field? So if you could pick like a top priority one. So I think, in my opinion, full disclosure would make it really helpful for the taxpayer to understand how they can do that work on their own without even having to walk in the assessor's office. So having all those statements of consideration, but I would love to hear your opinion on what you think would be the most effective reform in helping the taxpayer be on an even playing field.
I believe that the first thing is going to be the presumption side of things, because right now we do look at it as the assessor has the upper hand in that, and that the taxpayer doesn't have that presumption of being correct. When they bring in information, they just need to know what they need to bring in and what's going to be accessible. By doing that, I think that would take care of a lot of issues. But when, as the Board of Equalization, when we're not even provided the information that we requested through legal counsel, there's other problems associated with that. And I'm not saying this is across the board in every county. So don't misunderstand that at all. That's not what I'm saying. But if we don't have something that provides a direct guideline to make sure that that information is disseminated appropriately, then not only does the Board of Equalization not have the information that they need to make those decisions, but neither does the taxpayer. If you don't have that information right out in front, then you can't decide whether you really want to appeal it or not. And there were several situations that we had where that was one of the biggest complaints we had from the taxpayer, is that the assessor would not give them the information up front. When they got into the appeals process, that's when that information was provided. And a lot of them looked at us and it's like, well, if I'd have had this, I wouldn't have appealed. So I hope that answers your question.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, we got and then we're gonna stay and keep working this. And are there any folks here for like digital streaming tax? Okay, and I would just tell you, and I'm chairing, and maybe I'd turn the chair over, but I'm gonna move that we table that. And so I don't know how the rest of the committee, and that'll be a different thing, I think, but I just want to give folks some warning on some of this stuff so you're not here all day. That's what I'd like to do, but I'm only one person on the committee. But anyway, just as we plan our schedule, but we are going to stay on this topic until we finish, and then we'll break for lunch when we're finished. But we are going to work this bill at some point. So I want to tell all of us, let's really get back to this bill and focus on page and line, and if there's any suggestions on the bill and your support for the bill or against. So, so let's kind of
Mr. Chairman.
refocus. So, Mr. Co-Chair.
I just also in the same vein, people that are waiting around, that we're not viewing the Medicaid expansion issue as an opportunity for folks to testify again. We're just looking at it as a procedural check, see if our previous motion, validate that and move on. So just letting you know that. Thank you.
And how about, I'll just say this too, to be courteous of people's time. How about taxes on services? Last item, second to last. Anybody here for that? Okay, and I think similar to kind of digital, I think we're, I would like to put that on the table and continue to study that and not really, but we're in a different mode now. We're working this bill. But again, just being giving folks a heads up. Not sure what the committee will want to do with that. Okay, so we're back on this bill and this testimony. Are there any further questions of Chairman North on this bill? Representative Gray.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really, Commissioner North, want to zero in on the presumption a little bit, because you can get in the way we phrased it, and I think we got it right. I think it's very balanced. I mean, if the state court system still doesn't view that we took it away, I mean, what else we can do there? But talk about on the ground when you're receiving counsel from the Natrona County attorney and from all your counsel that there's a presumption, how much that affects the appeals process. Can you talk about that?
Sure.
Commissioner.
We are basically told that we have very few choices. One is either to affirm the assessor or to remand it back to the assessor. And the assumption is there that the assessor is correct and that the taxpayer has to prove beyond a shadow of doubt, basically, that they are correct in this situation. And that makes it really tough. It makes it hard on the taxpayer. It makes it hard on the Board of Equalization, because there's a lot of things that we bring up that we talk about, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what curbs our final decision. A lot of times we look at things and that we have to look at the big picture and look at everything. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we agree with it, but if the taxpayer is not able to prove that they're correct 100%, then we have to affirm the assessor. And so the presumption is a big portion of what our decisions are made off of.
Okay, thank you. Any other
Yeah.
questions on the bill?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Next thing I want to ask about Commissioner North is the remanding language. So we've heard from assessors that, well, things are remanded without proper direction, and that's why the assessors aren't taking action. Do you feel that there are situations in Natrona County where something has been remanded with clear direction and the assessor still is not taking action and properly changing the valuation in the way that the county board has recommended consciously that it is inappropriate? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, I do feel that that is the case, that has been the case more than once, where we have remanded something back to the assessor at that particular time. We've heard on a few occasions that all they were going to do is just send it down to the State Board of Equalization and not look at it again. So I do feel that that is the case, that we don't really have the authority. Obviously, we can't set values. That's one thing the Board of Equalization has no authority to do. We recognize that fact. And that's something that only the assessor has the ability to do. So, but even when we've asked to look at things, a lot of times that has not been the case.
One more follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So now I want to go into the fee appraisal. It's one other one I wanted to ask you about. So have there been situations, this is more my correspondence with Commissioner Milne, who could not make it today, and I think with you too, I'm trying to remember, but that you've pretty much been advised that fee appraisals are pretty much supposed to be ignored. Maybe that's not the proper word. And we hear from the state board that, look, it's in their rules, that they're part of the evidence packet. All we want to do is just basically put it in statute. And I think it makes it clearer for the counties. There's 23 different ones. There's 23 different attorneys advising the counties. Usually it's more than one person, I'm sure, in many of the more populated ones, that it's just make it very clear that it is something that can be considered. So in Natrona County, has there been questions raised about whether fee appraisals can be looked at and to what level?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Gray, yes, that has occurred. We have been told that it's all related to what the current mass appraisal value is, because they're comparing it across the board. And where this really has come into a problem is with brand new houses, brand new developments that have been developed. Those areas where you have something that is a brand new property that's been developed, and they had to have a fee appraisal done for the banking system, and yet they've taken those in and they tell us that we can't use that's not justification for remanding it back or looking at what the assessor has done. That's where we have issues with it, because if you've got a fee appraisal, a new one, then that should be considered, especially right now, in the way that the property values are going up, the way that the real estate market is right now. I think that's even a more appropriate means of getting an accurate piece of information sometimes, and looking at a mass appraisal, and they just need to be compared. That's really what it comes down to. I'm not saying that mass appraisal is bad. I'm just saying that it's not always the best method, and that there are other things like fee appraisal that need to specifically be looked at when we're evaluating the assessed value of a property.
Okay, very good. I think we're about out of questions. Commissioner North, appreciate you joining us today. And are we finished up now online?
Mr. Chairman, we have one more person. We have Bob Ide with Ide Land and Leasing Company.
Okay, let's bring him in and then we'll wrap up the online portion and then we'll wrap up in the room and we'll work this bill.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Yeah, I was on once and I think they clicked me off. Let's see here. See if, there we go.
There you are.
Thank you.
Go ahead and introduce yourself and where you're from and who you represent. Good morning.
Thank you, Chair Harshman. My name is Bob Ide. I'm here in Natrona County, City of Casper. I'm a multi-tenant office building owner in downtown. One of the few. There's not a whole lot of those properties. I'll try to keep this short. You guys have been going on a long time today, so I'll keep it as brief. I just want to bring up one example of what was talked about today and the Natrona County experience, and I would kind of move that a little further, saying that the Natrona County negative experience, at least in my case. But let me just start with one example, and one of the comments brought up by Representative Baker on what is compelling evidence. And I think that's a key statement that he made here today. And one example I have on the ground in the field, I've got one office building, and this is just one of the bad experiences. I won't go into the rest of them, but it's about a 30,000 square foot office building, one of my smaller ones, and appealed that tax. And with that appeal, I got the property data report. And in that property data report, it showed that the elevator machine room, which is approximately 600 square feet, was being taxed at 30,000 square feet along with the building. So that was brought up to the assessor, and essentially getting double taxed because they had the elevator machine room as 30,000 square feet when it was only 600 square feet. So appealed that, and that was a fairly easy process there. But in that process, they readjusted all of the depreciation of that building at that time, which effectively brought the value right back to where it was before. So, these are some of the things that we're dealing with. On the commercial end, it's not so much the mass appraisal, versus, statements of consideration. They work more off of, replacement cost, less depreciation. And, everything that I've experienced is just been so arbitrary and capricious. It's frustrating. So, Natrona County, I think, is the bullseye on all of this conversation today, and rightfully so. It's been a horrible experience for a lot of people. And I just wanted to make that comment. And that's only one example. I've got numerous ones. The building I'm sitting in right now, taxes went up, from 10,000 to 24,000. It's just kind of across the board. It's real frustrating. And the only other comment I'd like to make today, so I can get everybody to lunch here, is on this bill and the revisions. I would like to make the comment that I'm really against the non-disclosure, eliminating that. I think that that privacy trumps the other considerations on that. I think it's very important. Kind of studied a little bit. There's about only 12 states left in the union that still have non-disclosure. Half of those are in the Mountain West area here. A lot of our neighbors, Montana, Idaho, New Mexico, and I think that that's very important to not have that. I don't think that the statements of consideration are entirely, I think people can get that information just looking at the tax notices and seeing what properties are valued at. And to hit on that, This is before the prior assessor regime. I took a statement of consideration in on this same particular office building that I was talking about. And I showed them the purchase price with the state, they had the statement of consideration and they were taxing me over that. And, it was a willing buyer and seller, and that's what I paid for it. And they told me that didn't matter, that they had to go with the formulas and the system at the State Board of Equalization. So I think there's a lot of talk here today that, talking about the system and the formulas that, statements of consideration are almost null and void to a certain degree. And with that, I'll yield and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate your testimony. Any questions, members of the committee? Online, we have Representative Hallinan has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to ask Mr. Ide, it seems like the issue is the problems that have originated with the assessor and not the law. So would you care to discuss that?
I want us to be really careful. We're talking about this bill, and I want to keep focusing on this bill, Mr. Ide. So, if there's some more things in this bill, because we're not going to get into personalities and do all that in that committee meeting, and other elected officials against other elected officials and those kind of things. So any other comments really on the bill? You're generally in support of the bill, except for, it sounds like my notes, the non-disclosure part.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't want to point fingers and it was just a bad experience. And I've been doing this for 40 years, and this is the first year that, just kind of lay awake at night thinking what is going on.
Sure. Any other then comments? Well, we appreciate you joining us today and hanging with us as we work through this. So, okay. All right. Thank you. I think we're our last testimony. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Cindy Barlow. I'm just a private citizen that works as an agent helping people understand their property taxes and have worked a lot with.
Where do you live? Where are you from?
In Buffalo, Wyoming.
Buffalo, Wyoming.
Yep.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
So in support of the bill, we believe that you guys have already heard testimony today as to the reasons why this bill has obviously come before us. It only takes one to not execute in their job to affect many. And in this case, we have seen the results of that. Certainly want to address that in the state of Wyoming, we do have exceptional assessors. Being a past assessor, I can tell you that I know that the desire is to try to get out there and to do their best. However, when you sit on the other side of the table and you're requesting information to try to help put together an articulate appeal, when you're requesting the information and it's not being given to you. So part of the process when they go in for the review and they're told to file an appeal, then they've been treated as though there's no exchange of evidence within there. And most of the taxpayers were not, despite the testimony that you heard today, they were not getting their information prior to the 30 days before their docketed board hearing. Getting the information 30 days before your board hearing is not sufficient. We need to get it in advance. And in a year of COVID, and let's remember there's extenuating circumstances that took place that they were told to appeal. So once the appeal is formed, then no exchange of evidence was taking place. So in support of this bill, as we look at this under taxpayer remedies, and it's interesting to me that under a bill that is titled or is being formed under the auspice of being a remedy to the taxpayer, that we have had this kind of opposition to be able to support it and maybe just clarify the record so that we can get the information that we need, so that going to the county board, it's a better appeal, and then going to the state board, it's a better record. statements of consideration being public, when as the public, we're threatened that we're going to have a misdemeanor put on us because we talk about sales prices or whatever, we take that seriously. So having an open statement of consideration and to look at a valid or an invalid sale and to be able to verify that just the data load on the analysis is correct, it's really simple. It's amazing how many people I've helped that have actually withdrawn their appeals. So with that being said, having the statement of consideration and the language within this bill not only allows in the review a copy of that, so that when maybe they're leaving their review, they're having more information and understand it better. That would be helpful. Again, when we look at a bill like this, there's no intended tone to be assumed that it's everybody handling things in the same direction. It's that we need to have the information as taxpayers. Otherwise, there is no remedy. If we can't have the information that we as taxpayers are paying for these positions to acquire and then be able to have presumption, but yet we don't get the information, makes it very hard to bring anything that's compelling before a board and to be able to have a good story to support. The other thing, and this is in the rules of the SBOE and made it very complex, is that when you are presenting an appeal, that you are limited by time to be able to present your appeal. When you are given 20 minutes to give in there and give all the detail and make sure that each person is understanding your evidence is absolutely impossible. And that happens. So when it comes to presumption, the taxpayer really has a tough stead in front of them in order to be able to prove their case. You're given 20 minutes to present your appeal. You weren't presented with all of the evidence prior to your appeal, and yet the presumption goes to the assessor. That's why we have the language of this bill in front of you today. The 45 days does kind of take up for, as much as I understand the assessor's position of that, it does take up for the fact that when we're going by a date stamp, you got a week in the mail anymore. And so now you're down to 3 weeks. And you've got 3 weeks, and you've heard it from every single person who's testified here today that they do not understand the process. And even listening to the one assessor that had the problems had a tough time describing even the county value. So the 45 days would help to give us a little bit more time, hopefully now, to gather the data from the assessor's office to be able to, maybe they can understand even better in that 45 days, and maybe they won't appeal. So I definitely like that language. Where we talk, I wanted to skip back really quick on page 2, line 10, where they talked about, the statements of consideration being available for inspection. Maybe we put a period there and strike as provided by the Public Records Act, because it says in the statute already that the assessor shall provide. There isn't an exception there. So, but maybe that's an easy revision to this, to be able to come back and just say available for inspection, because then later on it does say that in the language of this bill, under taxpayer remedies, that during the review, that copies of the relevant relevant information, and I would caution us to be looking at that word relevant, because who's going to define relevant? If as an agent, I'm able to tell my taxpayer request such and such, if it's relevant to that parcel, relevant to that assessment, those statements should be, anything should be provided that the assessor used for the assessment of that land. As far as the language that goes on to give the remedy that it shall be remanded back, actually, let me back up. Under line 19, page 4, I think this is key in this legislation, and it's key because what has been happening and has happened for a lot of people is that after they file the appeal, they figure they're under a court case, and that's how it's been handled. I'll have you know, Mr. Schaus had to hire an attorney that cost him a lot of money. I know Mr. Ide had to hire an attorney that cost him, no doubt, a lot of money. And there were others that had to hire attorneys to be able to handle this because it is not taxpayer friendly. It is not. Matter of fact, it's almost a bullying at times of different people. And I've watched it firsthand. So being an assessor and sitting on that side and now being a taxpayer sitting on this side, understanding mass appraisal well. I am concerned for the taxpayers of Wyoming, not because we don't have great assessors, but because if we have one that's doing this to 3,000, then we have a problem, and hence we have this bill. So, yeah, yep. So on the appraisals of the property, I believe that it's great to be able to have just the clarification of that language in this bill, because what people are looking at and why there are so many appeals is because you're seeing an improvement value that is maybe at $100,000. There's not too many houses you can build out there these days for $100,000, but the land may be coming in, and I'm giving you an extreme example, but just to give you a picture, maybe coming in at $3,000. And you heard testimony earlier today that the abstraction process was used, and that's used because they weren't getting out there. They weren't looking at the improvements. Abstraction is the worst way that you can form an appeal your assessment, because without having to get into the details of abstraction, unless your data is very accurate, and even the Department of Revenue's rules and guidelines clearly say, be careful using this line unless you know that your data is very good. So appraisals of property are good because they will show you that what your land is going for and what that improvement is going for. It allows you to look. Yes, there's reasons that appraisals are, you've heard a lot of testimony today that appraisals are used for many different reasons, but ask them, simply ask them, what did you get this appraisal for? Was it for an estate? Was it for the purchase of a property like we've heard earlier today? That's good information to use. So I like having that on there. I also found it compelling that we were not able to hear any kind of evidence that could be compelling, that can be presented, that is going to beat the preponderance. You guys all heard it. I heard it. That's troubling to me because we've been able to show where equations were broken, and by being in their analysis through the Excel spreadsheet. But if I don't have the original documentation, if the county board doesn't have the original documentation, you know what said? They say, you prepared this. This is not original data. Same numbers, same software package. So being able to have that language in there is very good. I think this bill shows that there's issues with the assessment process, and that just by clarifying a few minor things brings the taxpayer to a little bit more of a level playing field where the preponderance of evidence is already against them. And with that, I stand for any questions.
As a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to spend just a minute, and I appreciate the discussion we're having here. I think it's thorough, and I think the committee is doing a good job, but I want to spend just a second here on the compelling aspect in your experience. And if you think this bill is going to do enough to address that. We talked about the compelling threshold. In your experience, what does it take to reach that compelling threshold to convince that maybe the assessment needs to be adjusted?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Baker, thank you for your question. And I'm still perplexed. Even as a past assessor, I can come up with, looking at the analysis and correcting and looking at the correct COD and presenting that. But the county board has a really tough time discerning, what has the assessor done wrong to law. The thing that I feel is good about this bill is the fact that when we make a request, even after an appeal is filed, the language where it says we can request information up to before the 30 days before your adopted appeal allows us to request more data from the assessor so that hopefully we do have a better record moving forward, coming before county boards and state boards. So this answers part of that. I mean, we're still having to do the uphill climb, but this allows and makes more clear that the assessor can't just shut off the request for information at some point to a taxpayer who isn't an attorney, and maybe they want to handle it on their own. And this allows for that to happen.
Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the answer. Just to touch on the question again, what in your experience, what has been that threshold of compelling? What have you been able to convince at any level at all?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Baker, we've had appeals that were remanded back to the county board, and they did go underneath review, and we did get the answer back from the assessor that they didn't do anything wrong, and so it's going to stay the way it is. We used things like the analysis. We were able to show that there were incorrect approaches to the locations used in the LEAs, that they had sales from different areas that they were comparing to maybe a lower quality valued area. And those were areas where this county board ruled back.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to talk a little bit about a couple things. One, can you talk about your experience and the intimidation that was used on receiving the data, the statements of consideration, and how that interaction went?
Just again, I want to be careful. We're working on this bill and the language of the bill. And so go ahead and, but yeah.
Mr. Chairman, just,
Careful.
It does refer to the bill because we're talking about whether statements of consideration,
Yeah.
how that's going to be.
So let's talk about statements of consideration. What do you think of those?
Mr. Chairman and Representative Gray, we had made requests by email early on in the process, about June, with a list of things that we needed to see to be able to verify anything to do with the sales being used. And those emails either went completely unanswered, and actually there wasn't anything else. We just didn't get anything. Matter of fact, we never seen a statement, an actual statement of consideration.
Any other questions? Okay, we're about ready to wrap this up. Go ahead.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we've been hearing from the Assessor Association that the tone of the bill is not is one of their main issues. And I hope that you've interacted with a lot of the taxpayers in Natrona County, provide a little bit of the face of the issue. I mean, what this process and trying to fix it in a really balanced way, what this means to people.
So, Mr. Chairman and Representative Gray, I know that the people of the state of Wyoming are passionate about the issue, number one, but Representative Gray, would you ask the question again?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want, just provide a little bit of the face of the issue in Natrona County. I mean, we're in from the assessors that the tone is the main thing, and there's always tension in any bill, right? And I look at downsides versus upsides. So the assessors say that they're a little offended by the tone. Okay.
Mhm.
But there are taxpayers, real people who many cannot afford this. And so I want to give the other side here on, you know, if it's just going to be the tone, you know, let's look at the other side of this situation. I think you having interacted with those taxpayers could help us with that. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gray, I think it's important to recognize that I do feel for them. I realize that they are looking at this going, okay, well, this is a problem in one community. But I think it's a bigger picture. And the bigger picture is if it's going to happen in one place, its potential is to happen someplace else. So let's just eliminate that and let's just clarify the language so that we're all on playing fair on the same field. The taxpayer already has to come up to these standards to try to prove their case. So I find it interesting that we're talking about a bill on taxpayer remedy and there's anybody worried about tone. This is a request in a sense from the taxpayers of Wyoming to be able to request their information. 9 times out of 10, they're going to want to walk in and talk to their assessor. Absolutely. But when you can see the inequality of the values that have taken place, you had from 19 to 20, one county went up almost $47 million in value. And then from 20 to 21 went down $24 million in value. You guys have heard this morning testimony that the previous assessor was not assessing to fair market value. So it went up 46 million. But in an economy where we're actually seeing a growth in our, sales, we adjusted 24 million. You went from 3,000 appeals to 300 appeals. And there's your answer. It doesn't take much to look at this county value from the volatility of its 925 million, Representative Sweeney, that you had asked about in 2019. It went up to 972 million and then back down to 947 million. So of course you're going to see less appeals. But it's important that we look at the tone of this bill is for taxpayer remedy. And hopefully we can keep in mind that we're working for the taxpayers of the state of Wyoming and that this bill can be the step in a right direction to allow them to be able to create a better record and not feel intimidated or to be made light of. This is their home. This is a tax that they can lose their home with, and they just want a fair chance. They want to make sense out of that $300,000 valuation, why their home is sitting at $80,000 and the rest is land when it should be the inverse. They're really not asking for a reduction. They're trying to make sense out of it. And we're looking at an in number, and that allows for mediocrity.
We appreciate your testimony and working with us
Mhm.
and with the working group and all the work. Okay. So we are going to close public testimony. We're going to work this bill. Members, what's your pleasure on this bill? Draft 276. Been moved by Representative Jennings, seconded by Representative Gray. Okay, let's just go page by page. Are there amendments on page 1 over to page 2?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Page 2, go ahead,
Okay.
Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to, as we alluded to this in our initial comments this morning, take out the statements of consideration. I think we addressed the exchange of documents, including the statements of consideration later. And I think we just have the public issue is another topic. So I would delete page 2 and then delete page 3 through page 5. I think there's another question of whether we remove the penalty. Maybe we do a separate vote on that because that's been used as sort of a intimidating factor. But I guess we could have discussion and just move to delete
Okay, so the
page 3
motion
through
is-
line 15. What do you think, Pat? Could I ask Representative Sweeney what he thinks if we should still try to remove the penalty?
How about we just make the motion and
Okay.
you can amend the motion.
Right,
if you
right.
like. So let's go.
Let's
Make the motion.
move to delete page 2 and then delete page 3 through line 15.
Okay, that's a motion. Is there a second? Representative Sweeney? Seconded by Representative Sweeney. Okay.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So
Just a
Just,
point of order.
Okay.
You'd also
Just
want to
go, Chair.
delete lines 12 and 13 on page 1.
sorry.
No, we got it. Thank you for that catch. Perfect. Okay. so
Thank-
we-
Thank you,
motion.
Mr.
Go
Chairman.
ahead, Representative Gray.
So I think that if we address the exchange of the documents, which includes the statements of consideration, the issue of completely making the statements of consideration public in light of the privacy concerns. I listened yesterday when I was listening to Representative Baker, and I do think that it's a separate issue and we shouldn't bring this into this bill and address statements of consideration in the exchange of documentation. In removing the penalty, I'm uncomfortable with the way the penalty has been used as sort of an intimidating factor in the past. However, if you don't have a penalty, then there's no enforcement. So I did include that in the motion. And as much as I think this is an important issue to talk about, I think it's for another day. And I think we should remove it. Thank you.
Okay, any other discussion on the motion, Representative Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think in theory, I can agree with, I do think there's got to be some sort of a stick, but probably not for today on the penalty. I also believe there needs to be a penalty if all information is not turned over, is what we were trying to get to for all the taxpayers across the state. So I'm fine with eliminating this.
Okay, any other, Representative Roscoe, were you comment on this or? Oh, Representative Yan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the statement of consideration is the biggest thing that can help taxpayers. By having this be transparent, they can truly know what are like sales in their area. And frankly, a lot of realtors already have the sales information already. So I'm confused on how we're saying it's a privacy issue when realtors sell this data to each other. So I think it just makes sense to have this be public information so a taxpayer can know. Because if we just say that the assessor decides what is considered a like sale, then truly, a taxpayer, if they think that, that other house down the street is probably a sale that makes more sense for them as a like sale, but then wouldn't be able to determine whether the assessor would reveal it because the assessor didn't think it was relevant to the mass appraisal. I think that we still haven't moved the ball as much as we could have. And this is one that, I think both sides could support. And we did hear from taxpayers at our last meeting that spoke in support of it. And I'm not sure I can support the bill with the other changes if this one goes away. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further discussion? Are we ready for the question on the amendment? All those in favor, we'll just raise our hand. All those in favor, and I'm going to start on the screen. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All those opposed, raise your hand. Starting on the screen, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That motion has passed. Okay, with my vote. Okay, so that passed 7-5. Okay, any other amendments? Representative Gray. And let's keep working it page by page. So we're on to page 5 now. There's a date, 45 days, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is another one. Let's on page 5, line 16 and 17, line 16, reinsert the stricken language of 30, and on line 17, remove the 45 before days. I want to be clear, we are not removing postmark or electronic transmission, which I think is important in light of the Natrona experience, and the assessors we're fine with as well, but we're changing back 45 to 30. We are keeping in the change postmark or electronic transmission.
Okay, second. Representative Sweeney. Okay, any discussion on that?
Thank, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just really quickly, it's another one. I personally think it could all work with 45, but I just say, I think there's bigger fish in this bill, and let's take it out and you know, not get into the calendar. Cause I did try to look at the calendar and it is pretty lengthy, and you know, let's deal with the calendar as another topic, and just put it back to 30. I think that's reasonable. Thank you.
Gentlemen online, anyone in favor? And
Yes.
I think my mic was off. Thank you. Okay, now opposed. Okay, that amendment has been adopted. Thank you. Okay, moving from page 5 to page 6,
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Co-Chair.
Mr. Chairman, I just was wondering if Josh had a chance to think about the legalness of putting lists and how courts have ruled and the dangers of.
Go ahead, Mr. Anderson.
And that's because there's a list on the language include but not be limited to, so.
Sure, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, there was a fairly recent case, 2015, I think, Yeager versus State, where the court looked at similar language. It was the language of including but not limited to, and did hold that was indicated that it was not an exclusive list, was basically the holding of that case, and that
So
solid.
there was not a limitation created by that
Very good.
language. So
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. Any amendments on page 6? Okay, Representative Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like on line 6, page 6, line 5, after the word area in the clause land economic area, add comma, neighborhood adjustments. I don't think we need a comma after that. I mean, I usually put a comma before the or, but
Perfect.
whoever
Is there a
people fall on
second?
that.
Representative Sweeney, second. Discussion? Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I just think we should add that in light of the assessor's testimony.
Okay, all those in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Opposed? 1, 2. Okay, that amendment has been adopted. Any other amendments on page 6? Okay, moving to page 7. Any amendments, page 7? Now flipping over to page 8. Any final amendments? Any amendments? Okay, members.
Mr.
I-
Chairman,
I think we're ready to call roll
could I make just a couple comments?
real quick. Go ahead,
Okay.
Representative Gray.
Mr. Chairman, I really think this is a balanced bill. We had a couple other approaches on the cap and on moving to a transfer system. This is an attempt to try to work within the mass appraisal and fix some of the issues that, yes, became particularly pronounced in one county, but they could happen anywhere. And the statute had some deficiencies that were revealed by the Natrona experience, but they could happen anywhere. And you look at the reforms from 30,000 feet up, the presumption, the assessors are okay with that. I do disagree. I do think it does something. I think we heard from Commissioner North on that. The transfer of data, I think we're largely, I think we have a lot of agreement on that. We took out the 45 to 30, took out the statements of consideration. The fee appraisal issue is in line with current rule, and we're putting that in statute. And then you have that fourth issue on the remanding, which I think is important. But this could happen anywhere. I think that this is an attempt to work within the current system, because one of the directions we received from the chairman is like, let's try to work within the current system. We had other approaches that were, and I think that's what we're doing here. I think it's particularly balanced, and there's really taxpayers across our state that are affected by this. And just because the tone is maybe not in line with where the assessors want to be, I think any bill has tension. But you look at the downside of not doing this and the effect this has had on taxpayers out there. I think that we should go ahead and do this if the main thing is tone and maybe that, well, the other argument we heard is that it doesn't do anything. I would disagree with that. I think it does in a number of instances and moves the ball forward. And I think we should vote aye. Thank you.
Okay, and I'll just comment. I just want to really thank the assessors for your hard work. It's the toughest job maybe in the entire state Board of Equalization. Really appreciate your work, because you're in a tough deal, but it is so vitally important to the function of our state, following the Constitution. And it's just so important. So we really appreciate you, even though folks will disagree, but that's not about that. And I think you said that very eloquently earlier, Assessor Keating. And so again, don't misjudge the tone of the legislature. If you feel that way, don't feel that way. And nothing but respect, and for the work that you put in this over these long months to this little bill to do a few little things. And so we appreciate it, and we'll just keep working and trying to all of us keep getting better. So with that, we're going to call the roll now on LSO 276.
Can we have other statements about the bill?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank
Go
you,
ahead,
Mr.
Co-Chair.
I've listened to this and I've tried to make the process to develop this bill be a fair process where people are at the table, and just over and over again, this has got Natrona County written all over it. The committee, a lot of the members from Natrona County, we really have some upset Natrona County people. I don't think can anybody think of another person from another county except for possibly Ms. Barlow that testified that it wasn't about Natrona County? That should give us some room to pause. The biggest reform in the bill was about the statements of consideration, and that's gone. And so all we have done is kind of move some pieces of game pieces on a board about predominance of the evidence. And I'm not persuaded by that. The whole issue about trying to say it's a criminal standard and somehow, if you're talking about a criminal case and the burden of proof shifts, that's a big deal, because it's either you're presumed to be innocent or there's the null set. In this case, there's no null set. There's a whole continuum of what things could be. But one person at the table has done a study, and that's where the taxes come from. That's probably should be the presumption in my mind. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to support this bill. And I really think it's a situation that got out of control in Natrona County. And this makes this reactionary legislation.
Hey, thank you. We're gonna call roll on this. Okay.
Mr. Chairman?
Roll on 276. So here we go. Call the roll, please.
Senator Baldwin,
No.
Senator James, Senator Pappas,
Excused.
Senator Schuler, Representative Baker, Representative Gray, Representative Hallinan,
No.
Representative Henderson,
Excused.
Representative Jennings, Representative Roscoe,
No.
Representative Sweeney,
Aye.
Representative Yin,
No.
Co-Chairman Case,
No.
Chairman Harshman.
Aye.
It is 6-6. 6-6 now.
6-6. Twelve votes.
Let's just have a read back of the
Let's
vote.
just read read those back to us?
I have Senator Baldwin, no. Senator James, I. Senator Pappas, excused. Senator Schuler, no. Representative Baker, I. Representative Gray, I. Representative Hallinan, no. Representative Henderson, excused. Representative Jennings, I. Representative Roscoe, no. Representative Sweeney, I. Representative Yin, no. Co-Chairman Case, no. Chairman Harshman, aye.
6-6. Okay, that bill has failed on a tie vote to be sponsored by the committee. Okay, members, we're gonna go to lunch right now. We'll be back and start promptly at 1:30. 1:30. Thank you all for your attendance this morning.